haunted attic. Reddit user Digsaw recalled how he moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a 1930s building in Melbourne, Australia. After a couple of months, Diggs came home one day to find a wooden board on the floor broken into 2 pieces. It was at least an inch thick and had been used to cover a hole in the bathroom ceiling, which led to a small attic space. Extremely afraid that someone was up there, Diggs was hoping that the landlord had arranged to have some work done. Diggs emailed photos to the landlord and was asked to call her straight away. She said she wasn't doing any work in the attic and her last 2 tenants had the same problem with the bathroom ceiling. She replaced the board. A month later, as Diggs lay in bed, he was awoken at 4 AM with a horrible feeling. There was a noise from up in the attic of something being dragged. There was definitely something up there. Diggs turned on the light and after plucking up enough courage went into the bathroom. He found the new board there on the floor broken in 2. But there was something else, the sound of children whispering. The same phrase was being repeated over and over again. "It's your turn. It's your turn." Terrified, Diggs turned on every light and watched TV to calm down, but his pet budgie Dexter, who was kept in the kitchen, began squawking. Stressed out, Diggs went outside to sit in the car and chill out until the sun came up. On returning to the apartment, Dexter was missing from his cage. Diggs found him in the toilet bowl, splashing around for dear life. After washing him and drying him, Diggs rang the landlord. "Oh wow," she said, "you heard the whispering too." Diggs stayed in the apartment for over a year and heard the whispering several times. After moving out, the landlord rang to say that the new tenants would really like to speak to Diggs about the freaky things that were happening in the apartment. Number 17, the Room of Terror. Close to the Botanical Gardens in a charming area of Edinburgh, Scotland, was a neat little row of houses. Very early in the 20th century, a couple bought number 17. For some unknown reason, the house had been empty for several years, and the enterprising couple were able to bag themselves a bargain with the hope of turning the attractive property into a boarding house. Once they had moved in, it wasn't long before the couple noticed that there was a strange and unpleasant atmosphere in one of the attic rooms. No one wanted to even enter the chamber, let alone stay there. It always felt as though someone or something was in the room, watching. One young girl who was working as the housekeeper entered the attic, only to come running straight back out again, screaming and crying hysterically. She passed out from the shock of the experience, and once she had been revived, no amount of coaxing could persuade her to explain what it was that she had been so terrified by. Not long after, word spread around the city about the goings-on at number 17, or the boarding house, as it became known. Students from Edinburgh University began to dare one another to go and stay there. One of these students was a young man named Andrew Muir. He was highly religious, but also interested in the spiritual side of matters. Andrew approached the owners of the house and offered to spend a night in the attic room in order to carry out a controlled experiment. Rumours about the house had spread throughout Edinburgh, and the owners were losing business as no one wanted to lodge at a haunted house, so they were delighted by Andrew's offer. It meant they could finally put an end to the affair. They gave Andrew a bell, and he was told that if he saw or heard anything unusual, that he should immediately ring the bell. The residents of number 17 bade Andrew good night and good luck before retiring to bed. Andrew was left alone to carry out his vigil in the uninviting attic room. It was during the early hours of the morning that the noise of the bell being frantically rung and a piercing scream of horror ripped through the silence. Everybody jumped from their beds and rushed upstairs to the attic to find out what was causing all of the commotion. The door was flung open to find the body of Andrew laying dead on the floor, the bell at his side. A look of wretched terror was on his face. It would seem that the poor lad had seen something so terrifying that it had literally frightened him to death. The attic room was never used again, and the whole row of houses was demolished some 20 years later. The Boy with No Eyes. Another Reddit user, named Commendo4, told a tale about his meeting with a spectral boy. When he was about 10, he was awoken in the middle of the night by the opening of his bedroom door. As he lay there, he felt someone sit down on his bed beside him. He thought that it was his mother, as he felt the bed sink down under the person's weight and something touching his leg. But when he opened his eyes, it wasn't his mother, it was a boy, and there were empty black sockets where his eyes should have been. The boy was about Comendo's own age, and he held out his hand, which held a small box. Although he was shocked, Comendo reached out to take it, but the apparition pulled it back. Again, Comendo reached for the box and said, "Give it." Then he blinked, and the boy had gone when he opened his eyes, but the imprint of where he had been seated on the bed still remained. 5 years later, Komodo's girlfriend was at his house so that they could study together. Whilst waiting for her parents to pick her up, she fell asleep. On their arrival, Comendo woke his girlfriend up. She sat up suddenly and opened her eyes. Pointing at the corner of the room, she immediately lay down and went back to sleep. Comendo woke her again and told her what she had done. She explained that she had seen a little boy up on the wall like Spider-Man staring at me with no eyes. Comendo was completely freaked out and told her the story of his meeting with the boy when he was younger. Another 5 years later, Comendo and his girlfriend were still a couple, and they also had a 2-year-old little girl together. They lived at Comendo's parents' house in his old room. His daughter started to wake up at the same time every night and began talking. When Comendo asked who she was talking to, she said it was a nice little boy who was lost and looking for his mummy. The ghostly visitations continued until the family were able to get a house of their own. Spirit creatures. One night during the 1960s, 2 men were travelling back along the A75 road by car to Annan in Scotland one night. It was late and the road was very quiet. About 10 miles out, the driver noticed an old woman waving frantically. She could be seen clearly in the headlights and was standing in the centre of the road. Just as the driver was about to swerve to avoid hitting her and knocking her down, she vanished. The 2 men were then stunned to see several figures emerging from out of the dark and rushing directly towards the car. These figures seemed to be mostly animals of all kinds: dogs, cats, cattle. Some even seemed to be unrecognisable and fantastical. At the centre of this menagerie, there appeared the shape of an old man. His long white hair flowed out behind him as he ran, and his mouth was wide open in a silent scream. The driver swerved right and left across the road, trying to avoid the strange creatures, and realised that none of them were actually touching the car. Was he just imagining it all? Glancing at his passenger, who he could see was equally terrified, made him realise that he was not hallucinating. Suddenly the temperature in the car plummeted, and the driver felt himself losing control of the steering wheel. Something was trying to take over the driving. Despite the cold, both men felt as though they were suffocating. As the passenger wound down his window, from outside the men could hear ominous sounds of cackling and shrieking. The driver stopped the car and it began to rock from side to side quite violently. Unable to stand it any longer, they both opened their car doors and got out. Everything was still. All they could hear was the rustling of the wind through the trees and the gasping of their own panicked breathing. Once they had calmed down and wanting desperately to get home, the 2 men got back in the car. But no sooner had the driver started the engine than the animals returned, swarming the vehicle. Determined to get through them, the driver pressed on despite the strange and scary noises. Getting nearer to home, they were comforted to see the headlights of another vehicle on the road. As they drew nearer though, they realised that the large van wasn't moving and they were going to crash straight into it. The driver pressed down hard on the brakes, but it refused to work. Both men held their breath as they waited for impact, but the van just disappeared into thin air, along with the animals and the old man. Everything was quiet and the road was empty. Exhausted from their ghostly encounter, the 2 men quickly made their way home. The basement. This story was told by Manny from the Canadian podcast No Inner Monologue, which is a great listen. When he was a young boy, his family didn't have a lot of money, so along with his uncle, they took on extra work to make ends meet. They worked the night shift together, cleaning the Keg Steakhouse restaurant near to the airport in Toronto. Because his parents didn't have anyone to look after him, while they were at work, they often took him with them. The job was quite easy, and it was well paid, but an incident that occurred one night, along with other supernatural occurrences, meant Manny's parents soon quit. Manny, who was about 11 at the time, and his uncle's girlfriend was sitting at a table near the bar. It was very early in the morning, around 3:30 a.m. All of the lights were on, and Manny could hear his father and his uncle talking together in the distance about a recent soccer game. Manny and his uncle's girlfriend were just passing the time with general chit-chat, when, as usually happened, they both fell asleep, Suddenly they were awoken by Manny's uncle. "Quick, wake up," he said. "We need to get to the basement. Your mum needs help moving some stuff. Hurry, it's urgent." The pair quickly got up and went to gather their things. When Manny looked up, his uncle was a good 20 feet away when he shouted back, "You have to hurry, it's urgent." They were both a bit freaked out by how insistent he was being. By now, Manny's uncle had disappeared from view. They walked in the direction that he had gone, so that they could follow him to the basement, but as they turned the corner of the corridor, they bumped into him coming in the opposite direction. He looked absolutely horrified to see them. Manny asked, "What's going on? Where's the emergency?" His uncle replied, "You two, your dad yelled that you were locked in the basement and he couldn't open up the door. He told me to go to the car and get the crowbar to force it open." "No," Manny said, "you just woke us up and told us to follow you to the basement because Mum needed some help." "That's impossible," said Manny's uncle. "Your dad and I both heard you yelling for help in the basement as we went past." Then Manny's dad arrived, wondering where his brother was with the crowbar. When he saw Manny and his brother's girlfriend, he went mad at them, telling them, "That's not funny, trying to scare us like that." He asked, "How did you get out?" They explained what had happened, and the four of them were standing in the corridor looking puzzled, when Manny's mother came running over. She was upset and said that there was someone trapped inside the basement, and that they needed help to get out. You can imagine the pure terror as everyone realized that there was someone or something trying to split up the family and lure each one of them down into the basement. The family got out of there as quickly as they could, and after a couple more frightening and unexplained incidents, Manny's mum, dad and uncle stopped working at the restaurant. Andrew Mackey's poltergeist. Mackey was a farmer in Kirkwood, Brightshire. What began one winter's night in February 1695 became known as one of the most violent episodes of poltergeist infestation on record, and terrorised both the Mackey family and their Scottish community. The story was documented in detail by the Reverend Andrew Telfair, the local vicar. On a February night, Mackey went to his barn to check on his cattle, as usual, but found all the livestock running around loose. Bewildered, he tied them back up carefully before going to bed. The next night he found them untied once again, but the following morning, one of the cows was suspended from the roof of the cattle shed by its rope. Then things began to happen in the Mackey house. A basket of peat for the fire appeared inside the house, upturned and piled up in a heap. It had also been set alight. If the smell of smoke had not awakened the family, there could have been a disaster. In March, the house was showered by a barrage of stones. It started with small pebbles, seeming to appear from nowhere and hitting the building, but the stones soon increased both in number and in size. Not only was the house hit, but also the occupants of the family. Inside, kitchen tools, bed covers and furniture moved on their own. A figure appeared in the corner of the room, huddled in a blanket, which scared the life out of the children. When someone was brave enough to pull back the cover, it turned out to be an upturned stool. Outside, the stones became even bigger, and members of the family, along with anyone who came to call, were black and blue with bruising. There was a continual onslaught of banging, knocking and door slamming. In April, 2 ministers prayed with the family, which made things worse. They were beaten by sticks held by invisible hands, and random fires began to break out. Some bones were found on the property and taken away for burial, but the trouble only increased. Prayers went on for 3 days, with more fires spontaneously occurring, and stones crashing through the roof. It was a good 2 weeks later when the family experienced the presence of a large black entity in the barn, which, after terrifying the Mackeys, just seemed to dissipate, and then everything returned to normal. No one ever found out what it was that tormented the Mackey family for 3 horrifying months in 1695. Shadowman. We'll finish with the story of security guard Raul Arguello. He worked at the Thomas Aldafo Duco soccer stadium in Buenos Aires, Argentina in April of 2018. Someone was repeatedly opening and then slamming the dressing room door, and Raul wanted to catch the culprit in the act. He had already been down there 3 times and found no one there, so on the 4th trip, he took his mobile phone with him to record the strange goings on. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to film it to show people later on, so they believe it when I tell them, because this has never happened to me before. It's terrifying," Raul said. From a distance, we can hear the muffled sounds of the door being banged shut. But as Raoul goes further down the stairs carrying his flashlight, the noise becomes deafening. Raoul, who is obviously scared, picks up a metal bar before edging cautiously nearer the door. He pushes open the door and bursts in, declaring, "See, no one is there." As he spins around the room, we can see a shadowy figure which skitters across the screen before disappearing into the wall. Raoul didn't see the Shadowman at the time, and it wasn't until he watched the video back later that he saw the horrifying presence. Take a look.
La puta que te parió. Concha de la lora. La concha de la lora. Pero como mierda puede ser que no haya nada hoy. Ya la tercera vez.
Raoul was supposedly so upset by the incident that he quit his job and found another security job elsewhere. And I think you'll agree that was probably the best decision. Doris Bither. Sadly, Doris didn't have the best childhood. She grew up in an abusive home in the Midwest of America. Her parents were alcoholics, and as is often the case with neglected children, Doris grew into a rebellious teenager. At the age of 10, the family moved to California, and it was there that Doris became fascinated with the paranormal. She started to drink and take drugs, as well as taking part in seances and using an Ouija board. Doris was thrown out of the family home and disowned by her parents. What followed was a spat of failed and often abusive relationships. In 1974, at the age of 33, Doris walked away as a single mother with 4 children from 4 different fathers. Her 3 sons were aged 16, 13 and 10, and her daughter was 6 when they moved into a rented house on Braddock Avenue in Culver City, California. It's claimed that just after the family arrived, a strange elderly woman knocked at their door. She told Doris, "You need to get out. I used to live here in this old house, back when it was just a farm and I was a little girl. There is something very evil here. The place is haunted and you need to get out." With no more explanation than that, she turned and walked away. It was after this chilling message that the infestation period began. There were creaking noises in the middle of the night when everyone was in bed. There were strong smells of body odor, disembodied voices and footsteps. Then the poltergeist activity began. Lights were flicked on and off, and objects such as a candelabra and a fuse box, which was ripped from the wall, were thrown directly at Doris. Soon apparitions started to form in the house. They were just shadows to begin with, but then began to form into human shapes that would sit in the corner of the room and just watch. Shortly after the first attack occurred, whatever was in the house began to bite, slap and punch Doris. Then things began to escalate, and Doris claimed that she was held down by 2 male spirits, whilst the others sexually assaulted her. Her eldest son Brian verified the attack, which he heard from the next room. He also saw the bruising on her body and in her thighs. He said there were times when he could see and hear his mother being slapped, picked up and thrown. Other family members, neighbours and friends also reported seeing objects being thrown around the home, and experiencing biting and scratching from an unseen force, even during the day. Doris was in Hunter's bookstore near the UCLA campus when she overheard a conversation between Dr. Barry Taff and Kerry Gaynor, who were 2 parapsychologists from the university. They were discussing their research. Doris approached them and asked for their help. Intrigued, the research team spent 3 months in the house on Braddock Avenue. On arrival, they first noticed the overwhelming smell of rotting flesh. It was the middle of August, and although the rest of the house was warm, Doris's bedroom was noticeably icy cold. There was no air conditioning in the house, so this could not be explained. Some team members reported seeing bruises and bite marks spontaneously appear on Doris's body. After encouraging Doris to berate the spirits, they saw intense orb activity with bright flashing lights all around her. Then they saw a swirling green mist that seemed to be trying to manifest into the upper torso of a man before vanishing. Although this was not caught on film, they were able to capture a photograph of Doris, surrounded by a strange arc of light. Doris shared her story with the author Frank De Filita, who wrote the book The Entity based on her experiences. This was later turned into the 1982 film of the same name. The family moved to Carson without telling Gaynor and Taff, although they were able to track them down. With De Folletti's help, paranormal activity had begun just weeks after they moved in, and had spread to the neighbouring houses on either side as well. It was at this new home that Dr. Taff was able to make a tape recording of footsteps and deep breathing from some unknown source, just before a vase was thrown across the room. Then the mic shut off on its own. Doris and her family moved again to San Bernardino and then to Texas. This time the contact between herself, Taff and Gaynor ended. She did keep in touch with De Felitta though, and told him that the activity continued wherever she went. Doris Bither died in 1995 of heart failure, age 58. Despite there being audio and photographic evidence as well as several witnesses, the entity case has never been solved. The Phantom Whistler. The first time Jacqueline Caddo heard the wolf whistle was in February of 1950. Jacqueline was just 18 and lived in Paradis, Louisiana. Every night she would hear the whistler from beneath her bedroom window. Her family searched the gardens and the nearby street but were unable to see the mysterious stalker. Things then went from bad to worse when Jacqueline became engaged to State Trooper Herbert Balsam. Now, what had started as wolf whistling became the tune of the funeral march, followed by a blood-curdling moan. Those witnesses who heard the moan were said to be terrified. The police became involved but could find nothing. Jacqueline soon became too scared to sleep in her own bedroom, so she went to stay with relatives, but the whistler followed. Eventually, she went to stay at her fiancé's house, in the hope that him being a state trooper would scare the stalker off. Instead, the whistler called Jacqueline's mother and left a message. "Tell Jackie I know she's at Herbert's house," he said. Jacqueline also began to receive threats on the telephone when she was told by the whistler that he would go to her house and stick her with a knife if she went ahead with the marriage. Jackie's mother was beside herself with worry. She said, "We can't get away from him. I don't know when we will get a peaceful night's sleep." The local papers heard about the story and it became big news in the area. People everywhere were talking about the phantom whistler that was plaguing Jackie and her loved ones. The police tried desperately to find out who the perpetrator was, but were unable to find any evidence of an intruder or any suspects. The sheriff's department even began to believe that the whole thing was an elaborate hoax, but the calls continued with the phantom whistler telling Jacqueline's mother, "I'll kill her, I'll stick a knife in her, your daughter will never marry Herbert." The stalking continued, and at one point Jacqueline collapsed because of the stress, when she and other witnesses heard the strange whistling while she was at work. Despite everything, the couple were determined to go through with the wedding, and on the 1st of October 1950, Herbert Balsam and Jacqueline Caddo were married. The wedding went ahead at the Holy Rosary Church without incident. After the ceremony, all threats and whistling ceased. The sheriff suddenly announced that he had solved the case, although he would not divulge who the culprit was, saying that he did not want to embarrass the persons involved. So who was the phantom whistler? Was he a joker or a dangerous stalker? Could he have attended the wedding, perhaps waiting for the right moment to carry out his threat? Was he even real? Some believe that Jacqueline is not the only woman that this has happened to, and that the phantom whistler is actually a supernatural being or malevolent spirit simply sent to torment people in love. Netta Fornario. Nora Emily Editha Fornario was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1897. After her mother's death, she was brought up by her wealthy maternal grandfather. She was described as being of Mediterranean descent, half English. Her mother was born in Manchester, England, and half Italian. Her father was a doctor from Italy. She was also said to be highly intelligent. Netta, as she preferred to be called, attended a ladies' college in Eastbourne. As a teenager, she spent some time in Italy, and on her return to England, she became involved with the ceremonial magician Dion Fortune, and became a member of the Alpha and Omega Temple, a secret occult society and a branch of the Golden Dawn. Netta believed that she could heal people. She dabbled in mystical practices such as tarot reading, ritual magic and telepathy. The small island of Iona lies off the west coast of Scotland. It has long been known as a religious and mysterious location. It is said to be a thin place, an area of energy where the veil between this world and the next is particularly fragile. St. Columba built a monastery there in 563, and it was believed that the Book of Kells was crafted there. Columba banished all cows and women from the island, stating, "Where there is a cow, there is a woman, and where there is a woman, there is mischief." Netta became fascinated by a story about the small Hebridean island. In the story, the monks had burned a fairy near Loch who they had mistaken for a woman. Iona also has connections to the Druids and is supposedly inhabited with many ghosts, as well as sea fairies and other elementals. In the late summer of 1929, Netta, who was now 33, left her home in London and arrived on the island looking for accommodation. She found lodgings with a woman called Mrs. McRae. During the day, Netta could be seen wandering around the island, roaming the beaches and moorland. At night, she would try and reach the spirits by going into a trance. She spent many months on Iona until late autumn, when she sent a letter to her housekeeper back in London, saying that she would be out of touch for a while because she had a terrible case of healing. Whether the healing was for herself or another person is unknown. On Sunday, November 17th, Netta began to frantically pack. She told Mrs. McRae that she had to go back to London because several people were telepathically attacking her. The ferry service did not run on a Sunday, so Netta was forced to wait. Later, after calming down, she told Miss McRae that she had changed her mind and would stay on Iona indefinitely. The next day, Mrs. McRae noticed that Netta was missing. A search began, and Netta's body was found on the afternoon of Tuesday the 19th. She was found lying on a ferry mound to the south of the loch. She was wearing a long black cloak, but was completely naked underneath. There were several unexplained deep scratches on her body and the soles of her feet. A large cross had been cut into the turf nearby with a dagger which was still at the scene. The local doctor, unsure of the cause of death, thought that she had probably died from exposure or heart failure. She was buried on the island at the request of her family. Stories spread across the island of strange blue lights being seen near her body, as well as a man dressed in a long black cloak. Her friend Diona believed that Netta had been murdered through a psychic attack by the leader of the Alpha and Omega. Had Netta been seen by the islanders as a witch, and had they murdered her? Had she been running away from somebody, or had her heart stopped during some sort of occult ritual? The mystery of her death is still unsolved. Eleanor Zugan. In 1926, the Viennese Countess, Wasilko Sariki, brought a 13-year-old Romanian peasant girl to England. The Countess claimed that she had rescued the girl, named Eleanor Zugan, from an asylum, where people from her local village had locked her away. They were afraid that she had been possessed by Dracu, the devil himself. The Countess had a deep interest in parapsychology and took Eleanor away, first to Vienna and then to the National Laboratory for Physical Research in London for a run of experiments. In the 11 months before her arrival at the research centre, Eleanor had been suffering from attacks of both stigmata and poltergeist activity. The test began, and investigators concluded that markings of the stigmata appeared spontaneously on Eleanor's body, and that she was in no way responsible for making the marks. The ghost girl, as she became known, was also able to move objects towards herself with just her thoughts. All of this was witnessed under test conditions. The Countess recorded over 1,070 manifestations either of stigmata or poltergeist activity when in Eleanor's presence. She saw furniture moving of its own accord and a pot of ink flying through the air before pouring its contents all over the room. During one test, a mark began growing on the girl's arm. It became worse and looked red and swollen, like the mark left by a slap or a punch, before changing into a welt, like those caused by a whip or stick. After a few minutes, the mark simply disappeared. Later, while Eleanor was playing with a toy, more injuries began to appear on her other arm and on the back of her neck. No one was near her at the time, and her own hands were being used to wind up the clockwork cat. In another instance, deep teeth marks suddenly appeared on the girl's arm. They slowly faded, but were still quite visible an hour later. Eleanor was illiterate, but began to perform automatic writing one day. She wrote in Romanian on several sheets of paper and was able to tell the laboratory secretary, that her lost keys were in the pocket of her coat. In their final report, the NLPR found no deception but concluded that Eleanor's own subconscious was the cause of her stigmata. They believed that when she was very young, the Romanian peasants in her village had witnessed her telekinesis. They were so afraid and had threatened her with all the things that Dracu would do to her. Subconsciously, her mind became obsessed with the idea of biting and whipping. If this complex could be removed, then she would no longer be troubled with her markings. The issue of her telekinetic powers was, however, more difficult. The researcher could not find any reason for the cause of her kinetic ability. They could only prove that it did actually happen. As she grew up, the supernatural activities surrounding Eleanor ceased. She returned to Romania and settled in, where she married and led a normal life. Christopher Case. 35-year-old Case had everything going for him. It was April 1991, and he was an executive at a music company based in Seattle. He made decent money and was happy both with his work and home life. On a business trip to California, he met an unknown woman who took a liking to Case. He wasn't interested and politely declined her advances. The woman became very angry. She claimed to be a witch and cursed him, threatening him with impending death. He flew back home, but soon after, he began to ring his friends in a series of bizarre phone calls. During the calls, he sounded confused and afraid, claiming that someone was trying to get him. He said he had been cursed, and that a witch was attacking him with spells and supernatural powers. Case told one friend, "They're after me. I am very, very afraid, extremely afraid. I could die from this." He said a witch had been cutting him during the night, and that the ends of his fingers were covered in blood and little cuts when he woke up. On April 14th, Case said he was hearing whispers in his apartment. He could see shadows moving around from the corner of his eye. He was awoken with someone's hands around his throat and felt them squeezing as hard as they could. His friends were worried. Case had never conveyed any interest in the paranormal before. His behaviour was erratic, and they began to worry about his mental health. And then things got worse. On April 17th, Christopher didn't show up for work and was not answering the phone. Because of his recent behaviour, a friend called the police and asked them to check on Case. The door was locked and there was no answer. They found Case fully clothed, kneeling in an empty bathtub. He was dead. There was no sign of a robbery or any violence. Several crucifixes were scattered around the room, and there were 10 candles placed around the body, all burned down. There were further crosses and strange talismans throughout the apartment, as well as lines of salt laid down in geometric patterns. The autopsy found that Case had died from heart failure. This seemed strange, as Case was a young man with a healthy lifestyle. The scene of his death would seem to indicate that he was involved in some sort of ritual at exactly the same time he was hit by a heart attack. So, was he cursed and killed by witchcraft, or did he literally scare himself to death? The unsettling case of Christopher Case remains a mystery. A Ouija board gone wrong. In July of 2023, a truly bizarre occurrence is said to have taken place in Colombia's San Francisco de Aces School, located in the town of Timbuktu. Emergency services were all of a sudden inundated with convulsing children who had all been rushed into hospital from the school earlier that day. The children are reported to have been temporarily blinded as they writhed in seizure-like fits, suffering from a great deal of anxiety. Some are also reported to have fainted. What could have caused such a strange occurrence? Well, strangely enough, the last thing the children were seen doing before they were admitted to hospital was playing with an Ouija board. For those who do not know, which I can imagine is very few, Ouija boards are believed by some to be a means of contacting the dead, and the boards lined with the letters of the alphabet, as well as simple phrases such as yes and no, are typically activated with a planchette. This is a small piece of wood that the user touches whilst asking the deceased a series of questions. If a spirit is present, the planchette is said to move on its own, forming the answer to the question by moving across the letters on the board. The children were said to be using an Ouija board in a room of the school when a young girl began convulsing. Other children rushed in to grab her to avoid further injury, and in turn these children are thought to have experienced the same symptoms. This had a knock-on effect on 36 different children of various ages. Staff at the school rushed in when they heard the commotion unfurling, and reportedly sprinkled the pupils with holy water while reciting a prayer, which is thought to have had little effect. When the ambulance arrived on the scene, all of the children were hospitalized. A spokesperson from the school has since said that all of the children have either fully recovered or are on the road to a quick recovery. Strangely enough, this is not the first time this has happened. Elsewhere in Colombia in 2023, 28 children from a different school are thought to have been hospitalized after using an Ouija board. One thing is for sure, we think children should be staying away from Ouija boards. What do you think, and have you ever had an experience with a board? If so, we'd love to hear it in the comments section below, or drop us an email to mystory@top5s.co.uk. Jinn caught on camera. The following photo comes from Makkah, a town from the western regions of Saudi Arabia. It's an image that was captured on CCTV security cameras posted in the Secretariat building, close to where the Kaaba, the holiest shrine in all of the Islamic world, is kept. In the early hours, at around 3 AM on October 2013, the security cameras within the building picked up something highly irregular. Standing to the right of what seems to be a series of building entrances can be seen a semi-transparent figure clad in a draping of white material. It looks very similar, in fact, to many of the Western depictions of ghosts, sighted at medieval castles and historical sites. It looks as though the figure is without a face, or at least it lacks one that can be seen clearly. Al Medina Arabic Language Daily, the paper that initially published the picture, have suggested that the creature could be a jinn, but it was not clear what its intentions were. Jinns are infamous characters from Arabian and Muslim mythology, spirits who can appear in a variety of forms, both human and animal. They are capable of possession, and are associated with snakes, scorpions, and lizards. Often referred to in Western regions as genies, they are neither good nor evil, and can turn invisible at will. Jinns are mentioned in the Quran. The belief in them dates back to before the 7th century. While the existence of jinns has obviously never been proven, there is an uncanny humanoid presence about the character in the photo. Some comments state that it could be a trick of the light or an insect on the lens of the camera causing a blurry white patch. Others are convinced this is real-life evidence of a jinn. What do you think? The Doomsday Cult who vanished from the world. This is a strange one. This story centres around a man by the name of Simon Cadwell, reportedly a local oddball who inhabited the quiet town of Nannup, south of Perth in Australia. An Englishman, Simon moved to Nannup in the early 2000s and quickly became known to his neighbours as a very peculiar individual. Bruce Blackburn, Simon's neighbour from around that time, remembers him as a very secluded individual who lived with his younger girlfriend, Chantal McDougall, and a young girl called Leela, presumably his daughter. A close friend known only by the name of Popik lived in a caravan that was always parked outside the house. Reportedly, almost every time Bruce saw Simon, he was glued to his computer. When he wasn't, he was ranting about the dangers of magnetic fields and electrical transformers, constantly paranoid of them being a direct cause of his self-proclaimed impending doom. Simon would bury bottles full of batteries in his house, as he believed they would absorb the radiation from these magnetic fields. He was an extremely paranoid man who would frequently break out in red rashes due to stress. Now, when Simon was glued to his computer, he was engaging in a whole other world, unknown to his neighbours. In his own online world, Simon was a cult leader known only as Psy, leading 40 individuals across the world who had joined his religious sect, the Truth Fellowship. He preached the word of a new world in his book, Servers of the Divine, and would spend almost all of his time connecting with his followers on the internet. Little is known of the cult outside of these reports. On one occasion in 2007, the cult leader approached Bruce to inform him that he wanted to leave Nannup for pastures new. Bruce jokingly suggested he should go and live in the outback or in a third world country, but Cadwell was adamant that he wanted to go and live in Brazil. This came with a very sinister plan, however. In an email sent to a follower in May 2007, the cult leader revealed plans to take his own life. He and his family had planned to head out to the wilderness and commit suicide, where Popik would bury them, before taking his own life in a location where nobody would find him. It's unknown if they ever went through with the plan in the end, as they soon vanished entirely. In the following months, the family looked as though they were making plans to leave Nannup. They withdrew $4,000 from McDougall's bank account and sold their pet dog and chickens to Bruce. Just before he left, Cadwell apparently invited Bruce over for a beer. Supposedly he was very relaxed and easy to talk to. Halfway through July, the family disappeared, never to be seen again. They were reported missing to the police after a passport arrived for Leela. McDougall's mother discovered it and raised the alarm to the authorities. Despite the fact that the family had mentioned Brazil, there was no record of them ever leaving Australia. It was also thought that Cadwell may have persuaded another young couple, Kirk Helgason and Alexander Fominov, to take their own lives after they visited him in 2003. Remarkably, further information on Cadwell was uncovered in 2011. Authorities digging into his past learned that his real name was Gary Felton, a man living under a fake identity after stealing the birth certificate of a man he used to work with in England. A fresh appeal was launched to try and track him down in 2017, but as of the time of this video, there has been no successful result. They have been missing for over 15 years now, and authorities are no further forward in determining what happened to them. Bruce Blackburn, their old neighbour in Nannup, believes that they may be living off-grid in the Australian wilderness without electricity. What do you think happened to the family? If you have any information, you can contact Crime Stoppers in Australia on the number on screen, or file a report at crimestopperswa.com.au. The Mercy Brown Vampire Incident. Let's travel back in time to 1892 to explore a strange tale from Rhode Island. In the town of Exeter lived George and Mary Brown, the parents of a family with several children. They were unlucky enough to find themselves at the forefront of a few waves of tuberculosis infections. At the time, a deadly disease spread by bacteria via coughs and sneezes, which ultimately caused respiratory difficulties. If left untreated, it can result in death, and in the late 1800s, this was a very real and very scary threat, which at the time led to superstition and rumour. Mary, the mother of the family, died first, losing her life to the disease in 1884. Later the same year, Mary and George's eldest daughter, also named Mary, would then pass. Following this, the family's younger daughter, Mercy, would die in 1891, and Edwin, their youngest son, would catch the disease later that same year. Now, around the time that Edwin caught tuberculosis, a strange rumour started to spread about Mary and George's family, possibly due to the rate at which they were dying. People in the local neighbourhood began to speculate that a member of the Brown family was a vampire, and one that had been responsible for the illnesses in the family. George, the family's father, vehemently denied the accusations, but was overpowered by the opinions of the local community. He was eventually forced to exhume the bodies of his family members for inspection, overseen by local doctors and reported upon by the local newspaper. At this point, both Marys had been buried for a significant amount of time, and their bodies had been decomposed to the expected extent. Then the exhuming party moved on to Mercy's grave, the family's younger daughter, who had died several months earlier. When they cracked open her coffin to reveal her lifeless body, what they reportedly saw was enough to terrify the townspeople. Mercy's body had barely decomposed at all, leaving her in almost the same state she was in upon death. What's more is that blood was still present in her heart. The townspeople saw this as evidence of a vampire in the town, and immediate action needed to be taken as a result. Mercy's heart and liver were removed from her body and burned upon a pyre. The ashes of these organs were added to water for Edwin to drink. As was the superstition at the time, somebody who had been exposed to a vampire needed to consume the burnt organs of said vampire in order to be cured. Unsurprisingly, the strange folk cure did not work, and Edwin succumbed to tuberculosis 2 months later. He was buried along with what was left of his sister. So what happened here? Why was Mercy's body seemingly so fresh after months of being buried in the ground? Well, superstition aside, the answer can most likely be found in where she was buried. Mercy's remains were first entombed in a crypt, which sat above the ground. It would have essentially been exposed to the elements throughout the winter, and the body is thought to have been frozen as a result, preserving it for several months and preventing the blood from travelling through her veins. It's either that, or she was really a vampire. Who bought this land? This is a weird one. In July of 2023, a very peculiar purchase was made close to San Francisco. Government officials were quick to explore a massive land acquisition just northeast of the city, close to a major US Air Force base. The land was acquired by an organization known as Flannery Associates, who have become the largest landowners in California's Solano County in the past 5 years, spending almost $1 billion in the process. Due to the proximity of the newly acquired land to the Air Force Base, officials have grown concerned that foreign nations with potentially malicious intent have attempted to access land close to the US military. Rep. John Garamendi is reported to have said that the government doesn't know who Flannery is, and their extensive purchases do not make sense to anybody in the area. He also noted the fact that they're buying land purposefully right up to the fence of the Air Force Base, which raises significant questions. Moreover, Flannery's attorneys have refused to provide further information on who their investors are, and the government has not been able to discover who exactly is behind the Flannery Group. All that Flannery have said is that they are a US-owned company, but the government cannot confirm or deny whether this is true. Flannery has also made no attempt to engage with government officials or the community, which is of further concern. What is of even more concern to the government is the type of land that Flannery has been purchasing. Almost all of it is dry farmland, land that would be impossible to turn a profit of over $1 billion with. This amounts to over 52,000 acres of land, over 300 parcels, 20 of which are near the Air Force Base. So what's going on here? Is Flannery suspicious enough to raise concern? And who could be behind this land acquisition? We'd love to know your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Turnbull Canyon, the dark place. On the surface, Turnbull Canyon is a beautiful area in the Californian Puente Hills Preserve. Lots of hiking trails, places for off-road vehicles, and mountain bikes make it the perfect place to spend some wholesome time in the great outdoors. But scratch beneath the surface and you realize how dark and dangerous Turnbull Canyon is, and the evil that saturates the place has a history that goes back for centuries. The natives who refused to set foot there called it Hatukna, which roughly translates to dark place. Unusual in that the area is quite bright and sunny, but the name doesn't reflect a lack of light, it reflects the darkness that resides there. When the Spanish arrived with their guns on a mission to convert the natives, they didn't care for their warnings and tales of death. Instead, they forced them into the area, believing that they needed to face their fears and convert to Christianity or be killed, and many Native Americans were put to death in the canyon. One shaman said, "Now we are without hope. Now we remain for as long as the sun rises and sets in the sky." This may be one of the reasons why visitors to Turnbull feel as though there are hundreds of eyes on them, watching them. Perhaps the spirits of every American native that was killed in the area wait there for the shadows to lengthen and the sun to go down so they can seek their revenge. The most disturbing chapter of the canyon's history took place during the Great Depression. For 10 years, during the 1920s and 30s, economic misery battered the American people. Many struggled and died from disease and starvation. In the Puentes Hills, new residents were said to have moved in. Wearing black robes, they held satanic rituals and were responsible for sacrificing children, thought to have been kidnapped from orphanages around the Whittier area. One story tells of a man who got lost and stumbled across a boy being hanged upside down on a cross as the cultists chanted. In 1928, Mary Billings was beaten, strangled and buried alive in Turnbull, but was lucky enough to crawl out of her premature grave and escape. In 1952, the canyon attracted death to its scenic hills once again, when Flight 416 from New York City crashed there, killing all 29 passengers. Many of them were believed to have been children. And horrors still plague the area up to the present day. Between the years of 1995 and 2002, 4 murders took place at or were connected to Turnbull Canyon. In 2002, 17-year-old Gloria Gaxiola was shot to death on Turnbull Canyon Road, and her body was dragged along by a car for 4 miles. In 2009, Cristina Martinez had her throat slashed and was stabbed in the neck with needles, before being thrown down into the canyon. Like Marie before her, 22-year-old Christina clawed her way out and survived. Then in 2011, a woman's mutilated body was found about 10 feet down an embankment in the scenic hills. Sadly, she remains unidentified. One official said Turnbull Canyon was a good place to execute people and dump bodies. Having seen so much tragedy and death, is it any wonder that the deceptively pleasant-looking trail is a place of dark energy and haunted by evil? I wonder if any of you have visited there and sensed anything strange or unnatural. If so, leave us a comment down below. The Angry Ghost. Cadderby Tunnel in South Yorkshire, England has been unused for almost 50 years. The tunnel is a paranormal hotspot and has been investigated on numerous occasions. One local ghost hunting enthusiast who has spent a lot of time there is Dean Buckley. He has thoroughly investigated the tunnel as well as the wooded area outside with the help of 2 mediums, and said there is always a constant feeling of being watched. One ghost is thought to be the presence of a young girl who is known as the Mexborough Ragger. She was part of the gypsy community and lived in nearby Mexborough, where she called out for rags on market days. She would carry the rags along with water, taking them to the local quarries and sell them to the workers. One day on her way back home, she took a shortcut through the Cadderby Railway Tunnel and just didn't hear the approaching train, possibly because of the loud noise of blasting from the nearby quarry. When she did see the train, she ran into a safety archway but dropped her rags and tragically went back for them. She was hit and killed instantly, and her ghost is now thought to be wandering the area. In 1903, a worker from the nearby estate died by suicide when he laid his head on the tracks just before the train arrived. Could this possibly be the spectre named George that one of the mediums picked up on? His footsteps have been heard running into the tunnel. The mediums also sensed 3 figures outside. They were alive during the 17th century. One of them communicated that he was a young soldier, yet another investigator was freaked out when confronted by the ghost of a policeman. But Andy Pollard, another paranormal investigator who calls himself the Yorkshire Ghost Guy, has provided us with our next clip. Pollard visited Cadderby Tunnel in December 2022 with his camcorder and a K2 meter. This device can detect spikes in the electromagnetic field that could indicate a spirit's presence. After setting up the equipment, Pollard asks any spirits nearby to come and talk to him. At one point, he captures a voice that tells him to F off, and later you can hear the words "trapped here" being said. Perhaps Pollard had found a ghost that is pretty cheesed off at being trapped here in this world and just wants to pass over to the spirit realm peacefully. What do you think?
Please speak up.
Keep talking. I'm going to take you up here for a little bit. Can you see the green light?
After the incident, Pollard admitted that the dank, dark tunnel was an odd place that he was wary of even in the daytime. On a previous visit, he supposedly captured the spirit of a woman asking, "Is my baby there?" If you live near the tunnel, then this one definitely sounds like it's worth investigating. The Night Nurse. One November night in 2022, Rob Williams, from Launceston, Cornwall, was just getting ready to hop into bed when he received a notification on his phone. He had installed a motion sensor doorbell camera and something had set it off. The camera pointed down the steps that led up to his apartment. Something had triggered the external light and the equipment had recorded a strange apparition standing at the foot of the steps. On first seeing the figure, Rob thought that it was probably just some drunk on their way home. He watched the person for at least 20 seconds before the light went out and the figure disappeared. Take a look. After watching the footage for a second time, Rob realised how strangely translucent the figure was, and was so terrified that he couldn't sleep after the incident and had to leave the lights on for the rest of the night. The camera should only be activated when something is physically present, so the figure must have had a tangible presence, but it appears to be transparent and otherworldly. Rob believes that the apparition has all the characteristics of a human, with a body shape and perhaps a hat on top of the head. Rob posted the footage online, and although he was met with some skepticism, one woman who claimed to be a medium said that she had communicated with the spirit who had visited Rob. The ghost's name was Helen, and she used to work in a hospital which was once directly across from Rob's apartment. Apparently she was 36 when she passed away from influenza. Rob has never seen the eerie figure since that night, although he feels that if the ghostly nurse Helen were to return, then he would be reassured that she isn't harmful. Launceston is a historic town, mentioned in the Doomsday Book of 1086, so it's hardly surprising that the area has its own collection of ghosts. Dockacre House, a 16th century farmhouse, is said to be haunted by the spirit of Elizabeth Hurley, who accidentally shot her husband Nicholas in 1728. Poltergeist activity has also been reported throughout the home. At the nearby famous Jamaica Inn on Bodmin Moor, you can find the malicious spirit of a highwayman who wears a tricorn hat and dissipates through locked doors. A distraught woman holding a baby has been seen inside the mirror of room 5, and a young smuggler who was murdered has been spotted pacing around the courtyard in the dead of night. Travelling west of the inn, the spirit of Charlotte Diamond can sometimes be seen on the slopes of Rorter. She was murdered by her crippled lover and wears a gown and silk bonnet. In a field near South Perwyn, the spectre of Dorothy Dinglet has been spotted in a haunted field. She is thought to have died in childbirth in the 17th century. It's safe to say that this area is plagued with paranormal activity. This Little Pig. Pigs in one form or another have often been used in horror films. They were put to great use in the Saw franchise, and who can forget the pig-masked psychos in Tormented, which was subtitled This Little Piggy Came Home. Sound effects from the movie The Exorcist even mixed pig noises into the demon's voice. Our fear of pigs could be traced back to their connection with demons, as mentioned in 3 Gospels from the New Testament. Jesus and his disciples were travelling to Gergesa when they met a demon-possessed man. He was too strong to be held down, even by chains, so he wandered around the tombs crying out and mutilating himself with stones. As Jesus approached him, the man asked, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, you Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, don't torment me." Jesus asked the demon for his name and demanded that he leave the man. The demon replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many," and it begged to be cast out and into a herd of 2,000 pigs. Jesus allowed all of the demons to enter the pigs. Once they had, the animals jumped into the sea and drowned. Legion appears frequently in popular culture across many mediums, such as books, film, and video games. While in the next short video, ghost investigators are checking out an unknown location that was said to be haunted. As one of the men approaches a red metal door, he jokes that there might be a body in there before opening it. As he swings his light around the interior, a strange voice can be heard on the video. No one heard the sound at the time, and it was only after the vigil, when the footage was played back, that the words, "I have the body of a pig," were heard, followed by a grunting noise. Take a listen.
Let me stick the camera through the hole first, there might be a body in there. What a tramp with no teeth. East what, subway? East wing. Can you get him? Get him.
A photograph was taken in the area where the creepy EVP was picked up. It is shocking and shows some sort of demonic pig-like creature peering out into the light. When the voice and the images are matched together, it makes for terrifying viewing. Take a listen to this again.
Let me stick the camera through the hole first, there might be a body in there. What a tramp with no teeth. East what, subway? East wing. Can you get him? Get him.
What do you make of that? The strange monolith. Turn around, there's a thing back there. We've got to go back and look at it. Those were the words of one biologist who was part of a division of wildlife resources team carrying out an annual survey on bighorn sheep by helicopter. The team was making a sweep over the Loch Basin in San Juan County, Utah, in November 2020, when the scientists spotted an unusual object that resembled something out of a science fiction movie. The team then went in on foot to get a better look and found that the object in question was made of shiny metal and stood somewhere between 10 and 12 feet tall. It was a triangular prism with 3 sides, a monolith made from either stainless steel or aluminium sheets joined together by rivets with a hollow interior. The rock that it had been placed into appeared to have been cut. It was as though it had been planted and firmly anchored rather than being dropped into position. As the state wildlife team approached the metal structure, one of the men joked, "The intrepid explorers go down to investigate the alien life form," but didn't seem in such a jovial mood once they had inspected it. He seemed genuinely bewildered when he asked, "What the heck is that?" The remote canyon of red sandstone looks more like that of a Martian landscape than that of Earth, and comparisons were immediately drawn to the mysterious monoliths featured in Arthur C. Clarke's Space Odyssey series and Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Those monoliths transmit messages from aliens in an attempt to influence human evolution. Authorities were confident that the monolith was some sort of art installation, although no one has ever come forward to claim the piece. As the structure was installed illegally, the Bureau of Land Management was positive that they would get to the bottom of the mystery. But before any real investigation could begin, the monolith disappeared, just as mysteriously as it arrived. It is unknown as to how long the monolith had been there, who embedded it, for what reason, and where it's gone. We'd love to hear your thoughts and theories on this one. Subway possession. In scenes similar to those in the 1981 film Possession, in which Isabella Adjani becomes possessed in a subway, 2 friends in San Francisco got the shock of their lives whilst filming in the Mooney subway. As they walk along the platform and approached a yellow dumpster, they heard strange sounds and spotted blood and debris strewn along the platform. Take a look. It's believed the footage was taken in June 2011. The possessed woman had allegedly just split up with her boyfriend, and he had assaulted her in the subway after chasing her down there. He then hit her in the neck with a glass bottle and used the broken glass to cut at her body before pushing her behind the dumpster. The possession supposedly happened after the guy had fled the scene and the two friends turned up with their camera. After the filming stopped, the woman ran away, hit her head on the wall of the elevator and passed out. The boys then called an ambulance. People are putting this down to a demonic possession or a case of mental illness. Either way, it's very sad. We're not sure what it is about subways, but a similar thing happened in 2014 when a video emerged from Canada that appeared to show a woman becoming possessed and launching a crazed attack on a fellow passenger. Take a look. That piece of footage was caught on an Edmonton Transit System train, and later transit police intervened and both individuals were removed from the train and issued violation tickets for fighting in public. The question is, was she possessed by something evil or just angry about something? Both videos have been up for discussion since they emerged, with some believing they are both fake, with the first possibly being a realistic student short film. Others believe that either one or both girls had taken drugs. Possibly the highly addictive and dangerous designer drug Flakka, also referred to as the zombie drug, which causes bizarre behaviour that includes losing inhibitions, gaining superhuman strength, and engaging in violent acts. Then there are those who believe the two girls in the video are possessed by the devil. What do you think is going on in these videos? The Scottish Ghost Fairy. Scotland in the UK is a place steeped in history, myths and legends, perhaps the most famous being the Loch Ness Monster. However, this next clip is not a monster, but an apparition that appears to manifest in broad daylight on the banks of a Scottish river. The clip was filmed by a lady who was videoing the river in the hope of filming some otters that had been seen in the area. Take a look and focus on the left-hand side of the screen. The woman didn't notice the anomaly at the time. It was only when she played back the footage. It's worth pointing out that the apparition could be an elusive Scottish fairy, as for many years Scotland has believed in fairies, originally thought to be evil. Fairies have been part of Scottish folklore for centuries. It is said that if you fall asleep in a fairy circle, especially after sunset, you won't live to tell the tale. Fairies are also thought to be responsible for stealing away babies and leaving a changeling in its place. The most vicious of the fairies are Baoban, Sith or vampire fairies, who devour their male victims and rip out their hearts. So was this mysterious figure something supernatural, or just an optical illusion? Whilst we're talking about Scotland, we thought we'd update you with the latest photographic evidence of the Loch Ness Monster. On the weekend of the 26th of August 2023, the biggest search for Nessie in over 50 years took place, in which hundreds of volunteers took part. The event was well publicised in the UK and inspired Chowchilla Kelly to go along, with a photograph she took on August 13th, 2018, of an unidentified large eel-like creature spinning on the surface of the legendary Loch. Chia managed to capture the image before the creature disappeared and never resurfaced. At the time, she did not want to face public ridicule by making the photograph public, but after showing the image to full-time Nessie hunter Steve Feltham at the event, he was astonished and she decided to share it. Take a look.
The beauty of these latest photographs that Chi Kelly has taken is that they're here in the bay. There's 15 photographs. It lasts 2 minutes, the sequence of pictures, and there's a clear, focused image in the middle of it that I can't instantly explain.
The creature was about 200 meters from the shore, moving right to left at a steady speed. It was spinning and rolling at times, although Chia never saw a head or neck, and she could not accurately assess its length. The two parts that were visible were less than 2 meters long together. Chia was convinced it was a creature, but whether it was the elusive Loch Ness monster is still up for debate. However, Nessie enthusiasts believe it is the most exciting Nessie image to surface in years. What do you make of it? And do you believe in the Loch Ness monster? We took a trip to Loch Ness a few years back, and although we did not see it, we must admit there is a strange atmosphere when standing down by the loch. The possession of Maurice Theriault. Maurice Theriault was the eldest of 15 children in a French-Canadian family. He had a tough life growing up in rural Maine, where he was abused by his father and taken out of school at an early age to work long hours on the family farm. As an adult, Maurice moved to Warren, where he farmed vegetables that he sold from his stand. He was known locally as Frenchie, but he was a troubled soul. Events from his childhood had severely affected him. He also realized he had superhuman strength and knowledge of things that he had never been taught. Maurice, who was a devout Roman Catholic, started to believe he had been possessed by the devil. By 1982, his symptoms were amplified when his father murdered his mother and then killed himself, and the church believed that the devil had taken over him. On 2 occasions, exorcisms were performed on Maurice, and he also called upon the world's most famous demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, which resulted in them calling in Worcester Bishop Timothy J. Harrington in 1985 to perform another exorcism. Despite the skeptics, the Warrens always maintained that the possession of Maurice was frighteningly real, describing how Maurice would bleed from his eyes. Here is a terrifying clip from one of his exorcisms. Be warned, this is scary. The Warrens claimed that during the exorcism, Maurice's head split open and boil eruptions manifested on his skin, with crosses appearing all over his body. That same year, Maurice was charged with rape for a second time, but the charge was dropped when he confessed and blamed his demons. In 1990, journalists Michael Lasalandra and Mark Miranda co-wrote with the Warrens and the Theriaults a book called Satan's Harvest, in which they recall the demonic possession that blighted Maurice's life. It's a very creepy book and will be perfect for the spooky season, so I'll include a link to it in the description below. But things did not end well for Maurice. Things took an even darker twist 7 years after meeting the Warrens, when Maurice's supposed demons drove him to almost repeat the crime of his father. He chased his wife into the street, wounded her, then took his own life by shooting himself with a 12-gauge shotgun. Some say that his tormented soul had finally taken over. Those who knew Maurice weren't surprised, as they felt he was either seriously mentally disturbed or was indeed possessed by the devil himself, as Maurice claimed. Michael Lasalandra went on record to say, "I do not think he was a con man. I think he sincerely believed he was possessed." Michael recalled viewing a videotape of Theriault's exorcism and said, "I saw things that were very hard to explain." His sister disagreed, saying she once saw Maurice put blood under his eyelids and cut crosses into his skin with a nail, and that he spoke a version of French and Pig Latin to make people think he was speaking backwards. She claimed her brother was not possessed, he was an actor obsessed with the occult. Theriault apparently had plenty of reasons to feel guilty and depressed. He pleaded guilty to child rape in 1976 and served 5 years probation. In 1985, he was again charged with rape, but the charge was dropped when, like we said, he confessed and blamed his demons. Whatever the reason for Maurice's actions, there is no doubt that he was a disturbed man, and his story and the exorcism footage was featured in the blockbuster horror film The Conjuring. Next up, we have Ghost Girl from the Past. In June 2023, ghost hunters Lindsay and Lee Steer visited Huscar Pit near Silkstone, South Yorkshire, where alleged paranormal activity had been experienced in the past. Whilst live streaming in the area, they initially believed that they had not encountered any spirits, but when they watched the footage back, they spotted a strange anomaly. Take a look and keep an eye on the right-hand side above the bridge in the bushes. Tell us what you see. They were also sent creepy screenshots from viewers who had spotted what looks like a white floating apparition in front of a tree trunk. It appears to be a young girl. The site they were on has a tragic past, and the bricks you can see are an old day-hole shaft that is now a memorial to a tragedy that happened nearly 200 years ago. It all began on the 4th of July 1838, days after Queen Victoria's coronation. 300 foot below ground in a coal pit were around 50 children and 33 coal getters, frantically cutting and moving coal, trying to make up time that they had off for the celebrations. The weather that day was calm and gloriously sunny, but as the day went on, it quickly deteriorated and a vicious thunderstorm set in. As the miners worked their way down the pit, the water began to build up above to dangerous levels, and because of the flooding, the miners were instructed to stay together at the bottom of the pit and wait to be rescued. However, some of the children ignored the instruction, and desperate to save themselves, 40 of them started making their way to Huskar Drift to try and reach the day-hole opening that you can see in the photo. But as they climbed out, water burst through, trapping and drowning 26 of them. The children who died were aged between 7 and 17. After their bodies were recovered, they were laid to rest in 7 graves. 11 girls were buried together in 3, and 15 boys in the other 4 graves. Could it be that the apparition in the video is the ghost of one of those children who died under tragic circumstances? What do you think? The Exorcism of Laura. We're finishing up with something so terrifying that we advise you not to think too much about it, otherwise you will not sleep. This footage is a rare and disturbing glimpse into a modern-day exorcism. It was filmed in Argentina in 2015 on a woman named only as Laura. The woman, believed to be 22 at the time, was reportedly a good girl turned evil after she was possessed by the devil. The perceived symptoms of demonic possession included superhuman strength, superhuman knowledge, a different voice speaking through the person, and the inability to control oneself or one's inhibitions. It's unclear which of these symptoms Laura was experiencing, as there is not much information online, but it was believed that she had been freed from the devil by exorcism. Before the exorcism could begin, locals gathered at the church in the capital of Buenos Aires, praying for Laura's soul and redemption. The exorcism was performed by Bishop Manuel Acuna, and in the footage, Laura can be seen withering around on the floor and screaming profanities, before being pinned down by church helpers, as Acuna supposedly drives the evil spirits out of her. The footage is disturbing, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. Take a look. Here is a translation of what the bishop is saying during the process. The demon exists. He's not an idea. He's not a theory. He's not something abstract. The devil is a personality and therefore has a strategy. We are talking about something terrifying, a fallen angel. The devil is not a metaphor. The devil is something real that Jesus Christ faced. The devil looks for the perdition of the human being, and for this he will use any possible evil instrument. When the exorcism comes to an end, Laura gives a strangled cry, and then suddenly closes her eyes and falls backwards exhausted, wiping away tears as the priest once again makes the sign of the cross over her body. Bishop Acuna can be heard saying, "Thank God we've recovered a daughter of God." Laura is supposedly finally free. But unfortunately, things do not always go to plan, and an exorcism is not always the answer, and perhaps the most well-documented case of when things go wrong is Annalise and Michael. You've probably heard the story many times before, but we'll give you a brief summary. Anneliese was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites. As a teenager, she had a history of mental illness and was diagnosed with epileptic psychosis. However, when psychiatric treatment proved ineffective, and Anneliese became physically aggressive, self-harmed, drank her own urine, and ate insects, her family became convinced she was possessed by a demon. In desperation, they appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. At first the request was denied, but eventually in 1975, Bishop Joseph Strangle granted permission for Father Arnold Renz to perform an exorcism according to the ritual Romanium. However, total secrecy was ordered. Renz performed the first session on the 24th of September 1975, and at her request, Anneliese's parents stopped consulting doctors and relied solely on the exorcism rites. A total of 67 sessions took place over a period of 10 months, each lasting up to 4 hours. Here's some audio clips of some of the exorcisms carried out on Anneliese. Despite the German dialogue, the guttural demonic voice is disturbing, so listen with caution.
Der Scheißdreck muss gebeten werden, sonst ist aus. Die Priester, die müssen nach ihrem Gewissen handeln. In Bezug auf das Ding. Ja, vor allem wenn... Nein.
Sadly, unlike Laura, Anneliese was not freed from her supposed demons and started refusing food. On the 1st of July 1976, Anneliese died in her home. Her cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration caused by self-inflicted starvation. She weighed just 30 kilograms, or 66 pounds, on her death. The aftermath of her horrific death resulted in the state charging priests Ernest Old and Arnold Renz with negligent homicide, along with Anneliese's parents. The priests were found guilty and were sentenced to 6 months in jail, reduced to 3 years of probation. However, her parents received no punishment, as it was concluded that they had suffered enough. Several films are based on Anneliese's tragic story, including the 2005 film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the award-winning 2006 film Requiem, and the 2011 film Anneliese, The Exorcist Tapes. Today, Anneliese's grave in Killenberg am Main in Germany is a pilgrimage site. Double death. Stuart and Cyril Marcus were twins, who were born just minutes apart in 1930 in New York State. Growing up, they were so similar that even their mother had trouble telling them apart. Whenever one of them got into trouble, she would spank them both just in case. Most of the time the boys only talked to one another, preferring their own company to that of outsiders. Both brothers were highly intelligent, although different in personalities, with Stuart being the more charming of the two. They went on to study for medical degrees and took their residencies at Mount Sinai Hospital together. The chief gynecologist there said that the twins were resentful of criticism and disobedient of orders. A senior doctor there split them up, referring to them as monsters, and Stuart was sent to a hospital in California, while Cyril stayed in New York. Cyril married and had 2 children, but Stuart remained single all of his life. He was engaged at one time, but his fiancée called it off, saying he was terribly impersonal and distant and had no interest in intimacy. Stuart returned to New York, and the brothers ran their own infertility clinic, where they attracted a clientele of wealthy women and were considered gods and miracle workers. But they were also seen as strange by many and were prone to violent outbursts. Stuart was given an associate professorship, meaning that Cyril was left to manage the running of their clinic alone. He soon spiraled into drug use because of the pressure, and his wife divorced him. In 1972, Cyril, who was now in his early 40s, collapsed from what was a suspected overdose, and the handyman at his Manhattan apartment called Stuart to tell him that he thought something was wrong in Cyril's apartment. There was silence on the other end of the phone before Stuart made his bizarre reply, "You're right, something is wrong." From then on, the twins became even closer and did everything together, including taking copious amounts of drugs. It was the handyman who first noticed the foul odour coming from Cyril's apartment. When the police arrived, one of the officers described the place as being a pigsty. There was dirty crockery and clothing strewn about, half-eaten food, and signs of the brothers' rampant drug addiction, with over 100 empty pill bottles found around the place. One chair was covered in excrement, having been used as a makeshift toilet. Cyril was lying face down on the bed in a pair of shorts. Stuart was found on the floor in another room, lying face up and naked. Sometime between July 10th and 14th, 1975, Stuart died. It was determined that Cyril died sometime between the 14th and 17th, as he was seen outside the apartment after Stuart's death. After 30 chemical tests, the ME was unable to decide how either of the men had died. If Stuart died from an overdose, why did Cyril leave the apartment? Why did he come back, and how did they both die? Did they try to come off the drugs by going cold turkey together, and something had gone horribly wrong? With rumours of some sort of incestuous relationship between the twins, and talk of mental illness and a suicide pact, the truth is, no one will ever know. Come out and play. It looks just like any other children's playground. There is a set of swings and a climbing frame, but this outdoor play area in Huntsville, Alabama, has a chilling secret. In 1918, the whole world was in the grip of a deadly disease. The Spanish flu pandemic raged on for 2 years, and influenza infected 500 million people across the world, killing between 25 and 50 million. With no vaccines or treatments, 675,000 of those deaths were in the United States alone, and the bodies piled up at the makeshift morgues. The flu arrived in Huntsville in September of 1918, and by October 7th, there were more than 1,100 cases. In just one day, the health officer reported 300 cases and 7 deaths. Huntsville was so badly affected that just 6 days later, the local newspaper stated that there was a separate situation, with all druggists and physicians except one stricken with the disease. Parents warned their children about the dangers of catching the flu and how it could be spread. They were even taught a strange little rhyme to remind them to keep their windows closed.
I had a little bird, its name was Enza. I opened the window and in flew Enza.
There is no official count of how many children died in Huntsville during the epidemic, or how many of them were buried in Maple Hill Cemetery, but the numbers must be in the hundreds. Years later, it was right next to this cemetery that the playground was erected. The locals now call it Dead Children's Playground, and witnesses have reported seeing orbs and spirits, as well as the swings moving on their own, as though a child is being pushed along by an unseen hand. It seems the shadow children like to come out and play after dark, and they often call out to passers-by. The Ghostly Girlfriend. This video clip begins with a Japanese guy sitting down and narrating his story to the camera. He is quite disturbed by his experience. He says that he was having dinner and drinks with his friends, but now he is very scared by what happened. Then we see a clip of him walking with his friends inside a restaurant. In high spirits, the mixed group of young people are drinking, smoking, and generally having a good time. The girl must have appeared out of nowhere, because when we cut back to the narrator, he says that when he saw her, he thought he was hallucinating from the drink. In the restaurant, the conversation and laughter continue until the group spots the young woman alone behind the partition. It's unnerving that she is completely still and seems to be staring at nothing. The narrator says that some of the guys thought it was funny and they laughed at the girl. It was then that she turned towards them and stared at the group of friends directly. With her pitch black hair, distorted features, deathly pale skin, and big dark eyes, she looked like something out of a horror movie. As most of the friend group depart in the elevator, 3 of the men stay behind and discuss what they have seen, wondering if she is a ghost. One of the men jokes that he is so drunk that he would be quite happy to go home with the ghost. The narrator thinks that the ghost must have heard what his friend said, because she followed them to the subway. On camera, he points to where she was standing and tells us that she jumped in front of the moving train, which was scary as hell. Then we can watch the actual event as the three men laugh and joke on the platform. They become quiet as they see the young woman standing there, watching them from across the track. She raises her hand and waves at them in a sad greeting before stepping forward and jumping down onto the path of the moving train. The narrator says that it's sad that the ghost would rather kill herself than be with his friends, but in the end, we see that she is still there on the track, just waiting to follow him home. It's quite a long video, but worth a watch. Take a look. Pretty creepy. What do you make of that one? The Exorcist. In Italy, many people believe in the power of exorcism to rid them of curses and evil spirits. Every Wednesday morning, at the Basilica of Impruneta near Florence, people, some of whom have waited all night, come to see priest Don Luigi Oropalo. One of those waiting is a Florentine filmmaker named Lorenzo Raveggi. He believes that someone has put a curse on him that has affected his life badly, both physically and spiritually. Lorenzo has brought clothes, candles and water to be blessed during the service. Priest Oropalo is just one of 3 official exorcists in the diocese who has been appointed by the bishops to drive out evil spirits from those who are possessed using exorcistic blessings. The amount of pilgrims is so great that they are divided up into groups and given coloured and numbered cards. Those with the most pressing problems receive red ones. Oropalo says that Pope Francis himself is very open to the use of exorcisms. It is thought that the Pope was filmed performing the ritual on a man in 2013. Take a look. The Vatican strongly denied that that was what he was doing, and said the pontiff was just performing a blessing. Andrea Gemma, who was a famous exorcist bishop and wrote a book about his work, believed that the Pope was putting more importance on the ritual after mentioning Satan in many of his early sermons. And just this month, October 2023, while presiding over Holy Mass in the Vatican Gardens, Pope Francis talked about the devil and how he needed to be driven out. Some of the indicators of demonic possession include using language unknown to the possessed person, having super strength, hearing voices, and having hallucinations. Symptoms vary depending on the demon and what its purpose is. The ritual of exorcism uses prayer, blessed items, and special oils to supposedly expel the demon. The strange case of the Queen and her bat. Walburga Oesterreich was born in 1880 in Germany, but soon immigrated to the US with her parents. Growing up in Milwaukee, Walburga began to work at an apron factory at the age of 12. The factory was owned by a wealthy German immigrant named Fred William Oesterreich, and Walburga, who was a charming young woman, soon caught her boss's attention. The couple were married when Walburga was 17. Walburga was a popular woman and given the nickname Dolly, whereas Fred was unlikable and drank too much. Despite this, the marriage appeared to be successful until their son Raymond unexpectedly died. Then Fred's heavy drinking and nasty behaviour escalated, becoming more of a problem. Fred was spending more time at work and at the bar, and Dolly was becoming more and more lonely. It was rumoured that Dolly consoled herself by taking a string of various lovers. In 1913, when Dolly was 33, she rang Fred and told him that her sewing machine had broken. She knew that Fred would send over the 17-year-old Otto Sanhuber, who repaired machines at the factory. Having seen him there, Dolly had taken a shine to the young man, and when he came over, they sparked up an affair that would last for 10 years. At first, the lovers met in hotel rooms, but before long, Otto was coming around to the family home, and it wasn't long before the neighbours began to talk. To avoid suspicion, Dolly decided that Otto should move into the Osterich's home and live secretly in the attic. Otto quit his job and became Dolly's slave. He spoke to no one else but Dolly for years. Over time, Fred noticed something was wrong after complaining of seeing shadows and hearing noises coming from upstairs. Fred decided to move home in 1918. Dolly only agreed to move if she could choose the new house. Of course, she deliberately chose one overlooking Sunset Boulevard with an attic and moved Otto in, and so the affair continued. In 1922, Fred and Dolly returned home from a party and a violent argument began. Worried for Dolly's safety, Otto came down from his hiding place with 2 revolvers and shot Fred 3 times, killing him. Coming up with a burglary gone wrong plan, Otto shut Dolly in a closet and locked her in before taking Fred's diamond watch, some money, and the guns back up to the attic. Dolly came under suspicion from the police, but unaware of Otto, nothing could be proved. Having inherited Fred's money, Dolly moved again, and Otto went with her, but bizarrely he still took up residence in the attic. Dolly began an affair with 2 other men, her lawyer Herman Shapiro and a man named Roy Clumber. She convinced Roy to get rid of one of the guns used in Fred's murder. After they split up, Roy went to the police. During her arrest, Dolly, who was nicknamed the Queen of Los Angeles, admitted the truth to her lawyer and told him that Otto was in the attic. Otto was nicknamed Batman and convicted of manslaughter, but was later released because the statute of limitations had run out. Dolly's trial ended with a hung jury, and she died in LA in 1961, aged 80. The Phantom Jogger of Canyon Hill. We'll begin this video by looking at a creepy story that you should take into consideration if visiting the graves of those who have gone before us. The Rocky Mountain state of Idaho has a fair share of ghost stories. However, there is one that has garnered attention and has attracted many to the Canyon Hill Cemetery, which resides in the popular city of Caldwell, just 26 miles from the state capital. The Phantom Jogger of Canyon Hill is pretty much what the urban legend claims to be, a ghostly apparition that runs around the cemetery at night, terrifying those who walk around or park their car within its grounds. The Canyon Hill Cemetery itself sits at 2024 North Illinois Avenue in Caldwell and boasts a grave history dating back to the early 19th century, where many of the deceased were murdered, committed suicide, or died during extreme famine. One of the plots contains a woman and her 5 children, all of whom died after their vehicle was driven off a nearby cliff. The sudden drop in temperature, strong pungent smell, and sense of being watched when the sun goes down has particularly got people talking and spooked in equal measure. The jogger is described as being a female of medium build whose legs are not actually visible to those who encounter her. She is said to hover rather than jog. The legend goes that when one parks in between 2 specific trees during the nighttime hours, the ghostly figure will run up to your car door and tap on the window. Something I'm sure you would agree would be terrifying in a quiet cemetery in the middle of the night. Videos have circulated across the internet, seemingly capturing the entity as she goes for her nightly run, and has converted many locals into believers of the paranormal. Idaho is not shy when it comes to tales of ghosts and other supernatural occurrences. Some have spotted an elderly lady that sits on one of the benches within the cemetery and doesn't move for hours on end, before suddenly vanishing into thin air. Then there is the sad story of the water babies of Massacre Rocks. It is believed that during the 1800s, the natives of Pocatello forced mothers to travel to the river and drown their babies during or just after birth, due to a shortage of resources to feed their local townsfolk. If one lingers long enough at the edge of the river, it is said that you can hear the wailing cries of the babies late at night. Some believe that they are the spirits of the children crying out for their mothers. Others believe that they grew gills, survived in the waters, and proceed to lure people to their own death as a way of exacting revenge for the horrors that befell them all those years ago. If any of you live in the area, we'd love to know if you've had any creepy experiences in the cemetery, and if you'd be willing to take a visit there for us in the night to see if you can sense anything strange. Infernus, the band who sold their soul to the devil. This story is particularly popular with those investigating the paranormal, supernatural, and occult. We have all heard stories of devil worship, satanic cults, and the selling of one's soul for fame and fortune. Artists such as Bob Dylan, Katy Perry, and the blues singer and songwriter Robert Johnson have all discussed the role that the fallen angel has seemingly played in their careers and livelihoods, as well as the sacrifices that were required for their success. Backmasking, the recording technique where messages are recorded backwards onto a track that is meant to be played forward, are said to contain satanic verses or cursed lyrics that, when listened to, summon the devil himself. In the case of Roger Teagues, better known by his stage name, Infernus, the process of selling one's soul to the devil is something that he openly discusses and is proud to have accomplished in his life. Teagues was born on the 18th of June 1972 in Umeå, Sweden, and is a black metal singer, guitarist, songwriter, and self-proclaimed Satanist. After creating his alter ego, he formed the band Gorgoroth in 1992 in the Norwegian district of Sunnfjord, and headed up the development of the Forces of Satan record company. According to the musician, he made a pact with the devil, which led to the band's first demo record, A Sorcery Written in Blood, being released a year later, resulting in a record deal with French label Embassy Productions. The following year, Gorgoroth's full album, Pentagram, was successfully released. Teague's stardom would ignite and see him heavily sought after by various bands within the same genre as Gorgoroth's, whose lineup was consistently changing with the exception of its founder and influencer. From there, Infernus's popularity, bank account, and dominance in the band was solidified after signing a deal with German label Malicious Records. The musician orchestrated the recording and release of the Antichrist album in 1996 and Under the Sign of Hell in 1997, with all lyrics, instrument coordination, and responsibilities being in the hands of Teagues. The band's music was certainly dark by intention and focused heavily on religious iconography and doctrine. Teagues proclaimed that the philosophy of the group was a Gnostic form of Satanism and that he, as leader, was the devil's minister on earth. Despite being a Satanist himself, Teagues has publicly expressed his aversion from the now popular Church of Satan, which has garnered a massive global following, stating that it is too commercial and doesn't practice the truest form of worship. With great power comes great responsibility, and it is a well-known superstition that when one makes a deal with the devil, there is always a heavy price to pay. In 2003, Infernus was accused of raping a woman at an after-party. Although he was eventually acquitted of rape, he was convicted of gross negligent rape and served 4 months in prison in 2006. As of today, Infernus is still performing at various festivals with different bands. In August 2023, he was attacked by a music-goer while playing at the Beyond the Gates festival in Norway. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that people can sell their soul to the devil? We'd love to hear your thoughts below. The disturbing case of Joyce Vincent. This next entry is extremely upsetting due to the heartbreaking nature of the person's death and aftermath that followed her demise. Joyce Vincent was a British woman who was born in Hammersmith, West London on the 19th of October 1965. Her parents had immigrated to the UK from the Caribbean island of Grenada, where her father worked as a carpenter. For 4 years, Vincent worked in the Treasury Department of the famous law firm Ernst & Young, but resigned in March 2001. The reason for doing so has never been disclosed or known to her family. After her promising career at the firm ended, she took up residence at a domestic abuse shelter in the North London borough of Haringey, where she worked as a cleaner at a local hotel. Not too much is known of Joyce's whereabouts, friends, or communications with loved ones throughout most of her adult life. She was extremely reserved, guarded, and elusive towards anyone who got to know her. Whilst living at the domestic abuse shelter, Vincent would sever all ties with her family, which surprisingly sparked little concern from her work colleagues, acquaintances, or so-called friends. In February 2003, the shelter would rehouse Vincent to a bedsit flat above the Wood Green shopping city, which was owned by the Metropolitan Housing Trust. Unfortunately, 9 months later, she would be admitted to hospital after vomiting blood and would spend 2 days at the medical center with a peptic ulcer. What happened next is truly sad and shocking. At some point in December 2003, after being released from hospital, Vincent would pass away at her bedsit flat and would remain there until her body was discovered 2 years later. The tragic story is even more depressing as it was reported that she died all alone of unknown causes, although it was suspected that it had something to do with her ongoing suffering of asthma or complications with the peptic ulcer. One of the main reasons for the lack of concern was due to the fact that the housing trust had paid half of her rent up front to support her after registering her as a victim of domestic abuse. After the 2 years had expired and her living costs increased, the property had accrued approximately £2,500 in unpaid rent, resulting in bailiffs being called to repossess the flat manually. It was then, on the 25th of January 2006, that the men who broke down the door to the flat found Vincent's corpse. According to the now discarded police and pathologist reports, Vincent was found lying on her back, surrounded by shopping bags and wrapped, yet unaddressed, Christmas presents. The television and heating was still working due to the debt forgiveness scheme she had provided by the government. Her decomposed remains were described as mostly skeletal, and that she had to be fully identified from her dental records. After a thorough investigation, it was presumed that she died of natural causes, as even though drug addicts were operating in the nearby area, there was no signs of a break-in or struggle. What is so mysteriously disheartening about this story is that Joyce Vincent was suffering in so many ways, yet no one seemed to notice or care. Even more strangely was at the time of her death, she had seemingly been engaged to a man who police could not locate. After the initial shock from the local community, Joyce's story had been discussed on various platforms and discussion groups, especially those relating to domestic abuse. Subsequent theories have arisen about her childhood, family life, and reasons for disappearing from public life. However, this is all too little too late. Her death was the discussion in a 2011 documentary called Dreams of a Life. In the end, I guess we will never know what happened to Joyce Vincent. What is so sad is that someone should have or does know. The sad end to Bobby Driscoll. In recent years, the subject of child actors in Hollywood has spurred numerous conspiracy theories and concerns for their safety and mental health. Performers such as Corey Feldman and Macaulay Culkin have been subject to extensive public intrigue and discussion surrounding the treatment of innocent children in such a very adult industry. Robert Cletus Driscoll, born March 3, 1937, was an American actor whose popularity as a child prodigy ran from 1943 to 1960, where he starred in numerous Walt Disney productions, including Treasure Island and Peter Pan. Driscoll, or Bobby to his fans, first landed a contract with the children's entertainment giant when he was 10 years old, and won the Academy Juvenile Award in 1949 for his performances in So Dear to My Heart and The Window. However, after exploding onto the film scene and becoming successful at such a young age, Driscoll's image and career would inevitably implode and become front-page news, all for the wrong reasons. In the mid-1950s, after the youngster's innocent looks faded and the charming characters he portrayed on screen throughout his adolescence had dried up, Driscoll's star quality began to diminish. Disney executives were quick to act upon this. For some unknown, ruthless reason, Disney terminated Bobby's contract with immediate effect when he was just 16 years old. It is also said that the bosses banned him from entering their offices and studios. This dramatic change in circumstances, as well as the fact that he had just moved out of his parents' house to study acting in New York the same year, took a tragic toll on the teenager and would inevitably lead to his untimely death. Despite attending acting classes to hone his craft, subsequent roles in small television programs failed to recapture the magic, attention, and plaudits that he experienced as a young boy whilst working for Disney. He began to express the trauma that was engulfing his mind, some of which is sad to read. In a 1961 magazine article titled The Nightmare Life of an Ex-Child Star, Driscoll states, "I was lonely most of the time. A child actor's childhood is not a normal one. People continually saying, 'What a cute little boy,' creates innate conceit." He goes on to talk about losing all of his money, being rendered homeless, as well as the disintegration of his marriage to his childhood sweetheart, Marilyn Jean Rush. 4 years later, on March 30th, 1968, aged just 31, Bobby Driscoll was found dead on a New York City park bench at 371 East 10th Street by two boys who were playing around at a nearby building. He was lying on top of a cot with two empty beer bottles and religious pamphlets scattered on the ground next to his corpse. A post-mortem confirmed his death was a result of heart failure, brought on by advanced atherosclerosis, which was effectively caused by excessive drug use. After no one came forward to officially identify the body, Driscoll was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave in New York City's Potter's Field on Hart Island. It would take a full year and a half before his mother was informed of his death, after she had launched a lengthy search for him, in the hope of reuniting her son with his terminally ill father. Yet another sad tale of a doomed character that no one ever really knew. The disturbing story of Carl Tanzler. Let's end this episode with a tale of love, loss, and living dolls. Carl Tanzler was in his mid-50s when he met 20-year-old Marie Eleanor Milagro de Hoyo in April 1930. Whilst working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, Florida, the German radiographer was asked to treat the young woman by her mother, who advised him that her daughter had contracted tuberculosis. This would have been a routine appointment for the well-travelled technologist, had it not been for an immediate fascination and recognizing of her face. It is reported that Tanzler had suffered from visions throughout his childhood that included the presence of a young woman, a woman who looked exactly like Maria. After doing all he could to help the ailing lady, Tanzler would develop an all-consuming fascination and obsession with her that resulted in him buying her gifts, proposing marriage, even though she was married to another man, and publicly declaring his love for her. Maria's sister, Nana Medina, stated that she never loved him. She was only nice to him because my mother told her that she should be kind to those who were kind to her. A year and a half later, Hoyos passed away at age 22. Tanzler immediately made it known that he would pay for her funeral and subsequently authorized a shrine-like tomb to be constructed above her grave, where he could visit each night. The heartbroken family kindly accepted his offer in the hope that his intentions were genuine and considerate. Unfortunately, his infatuation grew stronger, and so in 1933, Tanzler rented a wagon digger and exhumed Maria's corpse from the ground and took her back to his house. Coat hangers were used to link her brittle bones together, and her facial features were smeared with gauze, wax and plasters to prevent her skin from decomposing. Tanzler would dress her up in makeshift clothing and place a wig made from her own hair on top of her head, while preserving her scent with a deluge of perfumery products. This ongoing live-in love affair with the corpse lasted for more than 7 years, where Tanzler conducted all sorts of experiments on her body in an attempt to bring her back to life. When the family were refused access to the mausoleum above her grave, they confronted the mad scientist at his home and found Maria's corpse lying in his bed. He was arrested in October 1940, but did not repent any of his actions, stating in a local newspaper, "I did not want one so beautiful to go to dust." Carl Tanzler died in 1952, clutching a memento of his beloved Maria. The story shocked the world and has since been a talking point amongst various online groups. However, what is even more worrying is that some believe that his actions were justified and even romantic. What do you think? The Woeful Tale of La Llorona. Individuals out in the wilds of rural South and Central America, Mexico, and the southern United States in the dead of night might just be unlucky enough to witness one of the eeriest, most viscerally upsetting paranormal mysteries of all time. She goes by the name La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. From nation to nation, region to region, stories about how she came to be vary on theme. In Venezuela, the locals claim that this vengeful spirit is the ghost of a woman who died of grief after losing or perhaps even killing her children when they drowned in a river. Guatemalans claim that she's the ghost of a woman who became pregnant as a result of an affair, drowning her child so her husband would never find the truth. In Mexico and the southern United States, she is used as a deterrent for misbehaving children to scare them straight. For those unlucky enough to encounter her in any region of the Americas, your story will probably go a little something like this. Walking alongside any stretch of fresh water when the skies are dark and dead, be it a lake, river, swamp, marsh or wetland, you might hear the sounds of a human voice. It will be female, and she will be speaking in soft, teary-eyed Spanish, repeating woeful phrases over and over again. Following the noise at your own peril, her voice will increase in volume continuously. Speaking turns to weeping, turns to crying, turns to bawling, turns to screaming. Oh, my children, she has been known to cry, between heaving screams filled with tears. On certain occasions, she will be accompanied by the high-pitched wail of a newborn baby, proposedly the spirit of her vanquished child. Follow still, and you might be unlucky enough to see the spirit in person. Robed in a dirty, torn white dress, with long black drenched hair, a pale white face, and black running makeup, she is known to be actively aggressive, luring people into the water to their doom, or dragging people straight to the afterlife. In some accounts, you don't even need to seek her out, she will find you. Snatching children from their bedrooms to replace the one she lost. The only way to ward her away is to adorn your front door with a wooden cross to dispel the evil spirit. It's a far-fetched tale, but the mystery of La Llorona actually predates European settlements of the Americas. Many Mesoamerican cultures had their own versions of La Llorona, including the Aztecs, who had their own female spirits of the lake, who could be heard weeping on dark nights. So is there any truth to this mystery? Have you ever encountered La Llorona for yourself? And if so, we'd love to hear about it. Emily's Bridge. Picturesque wooden covered bridges are a common sight in New England's remote rural roads, synonymous with the serenity of slow-moving woodland rivers. One such bridge, which allows cars to pass over Goldbrook on Covered Bridge Road, nicknamed Emily's Bridge, has none of that appeal, and is instead cloaked in one of the most haunting mysteries of the entire United States. The story goes as follows. At some point in the 1850s, Emily, whose surname is unknown, was a young woman raised in a poor family who was engaged to be married to a young man from a rich upbringing after falling in love in relative secrecy. The groom's parents, unwilling to be associated with a family from the ilk of Emily's, told their son that they forbade the marriage, and that he was under no circumstances to see Emily again. Prior to receiving this news, the story goes that the groom had arranged to meet Emily in secret on this very bridge. As a result of his parents' scolding, when Emily arrived on the bridge at the agreed time, he was nowhere to be seen. Putting two and two together, a distraught Emily took her own life by tying a noose around her neck and jumping off the bridge into the river below, dying instantly when the rope snapped taut. She was heartbroken and humiliated and could not face life without her lover. This is where the mystery comes in. Ask locals who have to travel across Emily's Bridge on a common basis, and they'll tell you that Emily's story is not over. The occurrences began shortly after Emily's passing. Her body was discovered and retrieved, but the mysterious spirit still lurks around the site of her passing, and has been the subject of terrifying sightings and stories over the years. Those unlucky enough to encounter Emily in her long-dead state will not see a happy young lover, but a terrifying aggressor, adorned with long, slashing fingernails, that have been the result of mysterious gashes left in passing by vehicles who traverse the bridge. Supposedly, a furious Emily is tied to the bridge in death, waiting for her lover to return after all these years. Car tires, windows and doors have supposedly been wrecked after driving underneath the covered bridge, where Emily once hung, but she has even been known to violently strike out against pedestrians out for a relaxing walk, who will emerge from the other side of the bridge, with strange scratching sensations and red marks on their backs. To this day, the bridge is draped in eerie mystery. Some accounts of the tale state that Emily's body was never found, or that she died of other circumstances. but the idea of a mysterious, vengeful spirit ambushing passers-by as they travel across the bridge surely is a chilling one. We'd love to hear from any locals, if you've had any experiences whilst crossing the bridge. The mysterious spirits of the Tower of London. The Tower of London, the infamous fortress turned palace established by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, is something of an enigma. It remains not only one of the most popular tourist hotspots in London, but rather in all of England, despite being a historical site that bore witness to some of the most brutal and violent scenes in all of English history over the years. Catherine Howard, Anne Boleyn, and Lady Jane Grey were all beheaded at the Tower. You have the mystery of the 2 murdered princes, and even Guy Fawkes himself, the perpetrator of the infamous gunpowder plot, was tortured here. As such, the tower is draped in mysterious supernatural occurrences, and visitors there, even to this day, have reported sightings of the unimaginable between the tower's expansive courtyards and walls. Perhaps the most famous supernatural resident of the tower is the disembodied spirit of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, who was executed at the tower after Henry accused her of being unfaithful. Anne's ghost has been spotted in the tower's chapel, where on one occasion a soldier claimed to see her leading a procession of knights and ladies as flickering candlelight burned in the dark building. The strangest part, Anne still didn't have a head. Other young women have been spotted in the halls and gardens of the imposing building, including the unnamed spirit of a vacant, smiling young woman who traverses the grounds void of any real form or structure from the head down. In the quiet, cavernous rooms of the tower, sometimes ghosts are heard but not seen. Disembodied footsteps of monks have been heard wandering through the stone hallways when nobody else is in the room, and in certain rooms, eerie whispering or crying sounds have been heard. Perhaps the mysterious ghostly remains of those condemned to die in their final days at the tower. Margaret Poole, another of Henry VIII's grisly victims, was also executed at the tower. She was executed due to the fact that she was the mother of the supposedly treacherous Cardinal Pole. She was beheaded by the inexperienced, incompetent executioner that planted weak, poorly aimed chop after chop at the poor woman's neck, shoulders and head, as she screamed in pain. These very screams can supposedly be heard echoing through the tower at night. Some ghosts that reside in the haunted tower aren't human, or even identifiable. Henry III kept a menagerie of exotic, dangerous animals at the tower in the 1200s, which consisted of jackals, tigers, and even an elephant. He owned 2 bears too, a polar bear and a black bear, which have actually been supposedly sighted in the jewel room, their bulky, lumbering figures guarding the treasures of their owners, even in death. Other ghosts of the tower are a little more obscure. 2 spirits are commonly referred to as the White Figure and the Nameless Thing, the former being a vaguely female shape, glowing white in colour, that stalks the tower walls, while the latter is a strange, cloudy mass that occasionally follows guards on duty. Whatever the truth is behind this age-old fortress, it certainly is a place draped in mystery. Have you ever visited or had any encounters at the tower? And how would you explain these outlandish sightings? The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. We're off to extraterrestrial territory now with the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. It all began in New Hampshire on September the 19th, 1961, just south of the town of Lancaster. Travelling back from a holiday near Niagara Falls, Betty and Barney Hill, a middle-aged couple from Portsmouth, were in high spirits, accompanied by their dog, having enjoyed their time away. It was a little after 10:30 p.m, and as the couple made their way along a stretch of scenic hillside road on US Route 3, not too far from a dramatic mountain landscape, night had fallen upon the wilds, and visibility was waning. Staring out of the car window, Betty spotted something unusual among the stars, a bright light soaring erratically between Jupiter and the moon. Excitedly, Betty pointed out her shooting star to Barney, who decided to park the car and take a look through their binoculars, when he noticed that the object appeared to be getting larger. Letting their dog out of the car behind them, the couple ascended a nearby hill and took a look through the binocular lenses, Upon closer inspection, this was not a shooting star, as claimed by Betty, but rather something man-made and artificially lit. It was described as nothing other than a craft by the couple, who denoted that the unidentified flying object was adorned in rows and rows of rapidly flashing multicolored lights. Alerted, the couple began to speculate that it must have been a plane. Plenty of airliners passed through the region, and Barney was convinced that this was nothing more than the usual. He quickly changed his tune when the craft began to lower its altitude in what appeared to be a direct beeline for the now uneasy couple. Heading back to their car, the couple were now very conscious that the object, which was clearly at this point not a plane, was pursuing them, or at least shadowing them down the empty stretch of mountain road. This continued for an uncomfortably long time, in which Barney and Betty were able to get a good look at the object as it passed over the buildings, slowly descending. It was estimated to be about 24 meters in diameter, circular in shape and rotating, the rows of lights ever flashing. It made no sound and continued to zip in an unnatural motion from left to right. Then, as though waiting for the right time, the craft began to land in front of the Hill's car, stopping Barney dead in his tracks. Hovering about 30 meters in the air above them, Barney once again peered through the binoculars to see if he could discern more about the craft. To his horror, he claims to have seen 8 humanoid, but certainly not human figures, decked out in black, glossy suits and hats, looking at the couple, pointing towards their car, and speaking with each other. 7 of these figures then alarmingly began to head to the back wall of the room they were in, while the last individual communicated to Barney, telling him he needed to stay where he was and to keep looking at the craft. Instantly, fins supposedly sprouted from a structure that began to descend from the bottom of the craft, which hung over the heads of the bewildered couple. Screaming, Barney expressed his fear to Betty of his capture by the extraterrestrials, and began to speed away from the craft, driving himself, Betty and their dog down the road to get as far away as he could from the supposed aliens that were about to abduct the couple. As Barney drove away, a deafening sequence of buzzing sounds enveloped the car, passing a strange sensation through the couple's bodies. Brain fog surrounded them, and they both struggled to comprehend what was going on, in a bizarre haze of confusion and terror. It wasn't until much later when the couple regained full consciousness and Barney had realized that while in his altered state, he had traveled nearly 35 miles down the road. When they arrived home, the couple were able to stop and think. They could not explain anything they had experienced, and several immediate side effects of the encounter began to show themselves. Their watches had both been broken, as had the strap on their binoculars. Their clothes were dirty and in places scraped and torn. In the forthcoming years, 5 separate labs would examine the couple's clothes from the encounter, 2 disappointingly inclusive results. Barney had a strange urge to examine himself in the bathroom, and Betty began having terrifying nightmares, where she and Barney were being led through the woods at night by little humanoids in shiny blue outfits, where they were taken up into the craft they had seen that night, before taken for painful and invasive biological examinations by the staff on board. Following the terrible encounter, the Hills underwent extensive hypnosis and therapy, where their stories, right down to the most minute of details, matched perfectly. Although several hypotheses have been raised, experts have not been able to discern the truth behind this story. Yet explanations from psychosis to hoaxes have been raised. The question is, what do you think happened that night? Eerie occurrences at the Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary, located in Philadelphia, looks more like a castle or fortress than a place of correction and rehabilitation. Functioning as a prison from its opening in 1829 to its closure in 1971, the penitentiary is an imposing, terrifying building all on its own. Bastion-like towers and huge, heavy doors comprise the exterior, while on the inside, block after block of cells can be found across the site. In recent years, the prison has been a site of tourist attraction, hosting Halloween events on account of its mysterious, haunted past. In its heyday, notorious criminals such as infamous gangster Al Capone and prolific bank robber Willie Sutton were imprisoned at Eastern State Penitentiary, but today the building lies dilapidated and abandoned. but it would seem that in several mysterious instances, some of the old residents of the prison have decided to stay. Conditions for those incarcerated were shocking. Charles Dickens, on his 1842 visit to the penitentiary, claimed that the solitary conditions the prisoners were forced into were like being buried alive, and suggested that they must have undergone severe psychological torment as a result of their imprisonment there. Disease was rife amongst the prisoners, who were forced to live in squalor. Murder and suicide rates soared on the inside, and many prisoners would be driven mad as a result of their anguish and situation. Unruly prisoners were subjected to medieval torture. Those subjected to the brutal water bath were dunked into a freezing vat of water before being stripped and hung on a wall in the depths of winter, until ice and frost started to form in their bodies. The hole was used for particularly difficult individuals. This was nothing short of a pitch-black underground cell, where prisoners were denied access to light, human contact, a toilet, or food until they were deemed ready to re-enter the general population. The mad chair was even more brutal. Prisoners were strapped down to it, tying the victims so tightly that amputations were often required shortly after, due to the severity of the loss of blood circulation to the prisoners' limbs. But how is this linked to supernatural mystery, you may ask? Well, you may be unsurprised that a site as brutal and primitive as Eastern State Penitentiary has its fair share of mysterious, ghostly residents, presumably those of the prisoners that were tortured into madness or suicide. Across the entire prison, stories have arisen from visitors to the site of eerie laughter, crying and whispering being heard from the empty corridors, disembodied shadowy figures walking through hallways, and strange faces forming in the cells. Gary Johnson, who works in maintenance at the prison, claims to have had a brutal encounter when working in an old cell in Block 4. When he unlocked the door, a strange force grabbed him by the neck, and he could barely move or breathe. As it squeezed tighter, faces began to appear on the walls, and one face in particular began to signal and communicate with him. Other strange occurrences at the prison have included cold spots appearing randomly in the building, ghostly footsteps emanating from nowhere, mysterious shapes crawling through the courtyards, and unexplained figures showing up on thermal imaging cameras. It has, as a result, gained a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in all of America, and many individuals have reported feeling, hearing, or witnessing supernatural horrors within the building's oppressive, dramatic stone walls. This is a place we will most definitely visit one day, and we'd love to know if any of you have ever been before. The Haunted Hospital. How would you react if someone you knew had died the day before appeared before your very eyes the next day? Well, that's reportedly what happened in Buenos Aires, Argentina, late 2022, at the Finocchietto Sanatorium Hospital, when something very eerie indeed was captured on CCTV footage, which we're about to show. The footage shows a security guard at the hospital leaving his chair to let someone in. Only, it seems that he's the only one who can see them. He guides the seemingly invisible patient through to the waiting area, before briefly chatting with them and offering them a wheelchair. They appear to decline his offer and walk through to the doctor's office themselves. The patient that he reportedly dealt with was an elderly woman. Take a look. The security guard himself raised his concerns to the doctors when he did not see the woman leave the hospital hours later into his shift. When he went to check on her to see if there was a medical concern, the doctors reported that there was nobody there that matched her description. The security guard gave the doctors her name, and they informed the guard that there is no way it could have been her. Records show that somebody with her name, fitting her description, passed away just the night before. Staff at the hospital have accused the security guard of playing a prank on them, but why would he go through the process of letting the patient into the hospital and talking to himself if this was the case? This story is currently under investigation, but it truly is a strange one. What do you think really happened, and what do you make of that footage? Take a look at it one more time. Who was writing these letters? This is a terrifying tale of terrorism and threat that comes from the town of Circleville in Ohio. Before the year of 1976, it was a quiet, mostly sleepy town that took pride in its annual pumpkin festival and pleasant countryside atmosphere. That was until a letter arrived addressed to Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver. In block capitals and simply signed off as the Circleville writer at the bottom, the anonymous note accused Mary, a married woman, of having an affair with Gordon Macy, a married man, who worked as the school superintendent. Understandably, Mary was unsettled by this. She denied the sender's claims and kept the note secret from her husband, but more letters arrived at the family home, this time for her husband Ron. The Circleville writer sent Ron the details of Mary's supposed affair, but he didn't believe them. This prompted the mystery writer to send a more threatening note to Ron, which read, "Gillespie, you've had 2 weeks and done nothing. You are a pig. Make her admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CB, posters, signs, billboards, until the truth comes out. Only pigs ride motorcycles. Good hunting in your red and white truck on your way to work. I followed him for weeks since last summer, and have seen her meet with him several times." The writer then sent further letters to the school board, complete with Mary's bus driver number, encouraging the board to remove Mary's child from the school. Gordon Macy, the man Mary was supposed to be having an affair with, also continued to receive letters. The writer threatened to cut his tires and brakes if he did not stop seeing Mary. These soon escalated to death threats, addressed to Mary and Ron's 12-year-old daughter, claiming that Gordon was abusing her. At this point, the couple became terrified. They took the letters to the police, who wiretapped their phones, and kept a close eye on their properties in case of any illegal activity. They caught no one. At this point, the writer had begun to target other residents of Circleville. Alarmingly, many of these letters had been written with a pen tipped with poison. The Gillespies, disappointed with the fact the police had not managed to catch the writer, turned to their family for help. Karen and Paul Freshour, Ron's sister and brother-in-law. Remarkably, the Freshhours immediately came up with a suspect name, another local school bus driver by the name of David Longberry, who worked with Mary. The supposed motive was that David was bitter about being rejected romantically by Mary on numerous occasions and wanted to scare her. When the Freshhours wrote to him saying they knew what he was doing and demanding him to stop, the letters did in fact stop, for a while. Soon, the writer had started setting up signs along Mary's bus route, threatening her and implicating her in the affair. The death threats and serious accusations of abuse by Gordon's hands were still present. While Ron worked to dismantle the signs as they popped up, Mary travelled to Florida to visit her sister in order to get away from it all. This left Ron on his own. While on the evening of 19th of August 1977, Ron received a phone call from a man he was sure was the Circleville writer. Furious, he left the house in his truck, taking a gun with him. Less than an hour later, and just at the end of the road, Ron's corpse was found amidst the wreckage of his truck. In the police investigation, it was discovered that he had fired a shot from his gun, but the bullet was nowhere to be found. He was also found to be twice over the legal alcohol limit, despite having only rarely touched alcohol. Unsurprisingly, the family suspected foul play, and the sheriff agreed. Rigorous investigations went ahead to try and prove this, but they could not find anything. If the Circleville writer was responsible for the death, they had left no trace. The death was ultimately declared an accident, but even Ron's death did not stop the letters, however. Many residents of the town came under fire from the threats, and remarkably, some of them proved to be true. Ray Carroll, the town coroner, was accused in 1977 of being a serial abuser by the Circleville writer. 10 years later, he was convicted of this crime. Even Mary would eventually go on to confess to the affair she was first accused of, although she insisted that it only took place after Ron had been pronounced dead. This still was not enough to stop the writer. On February 7, 1983, Mary encountered a sign set up by the side of the road which displayed in graphic detail the abuse that was said to have taken place between Gordon and Mary's 12-year-old daughter. When she stopped the bus to take the sign down, she noticed something alarming: a string connecting the sign to a small box by the side of the road. She left the sign where it was and investigated the box. Within it was a gun, primed to fire at Mary as soon as she took down the sign. The gun's serial number was traced to Wesley, an employee of a local brewery. He reportedly sold the gun to his supervisor and had nothing to do with it for several months. His supervisor, amazingly, was Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law, who was supposed to be helping Mary solve the crime. Paul was immediately arrested but maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed. The officers asked Ron to replicate the handwriting in the letters, and it was a perfect match. This evidence was presented against Paul in his trial, which he seemed to be losing fast. However, another man was supposedly sighted at the site of the gun trap around 20 minutes before it was discovered. This man did not match Paul's description. Despite this, Paul was eventually sentenced to 7 to 25 years behind bars. With Paul in jail, that was presumably the end of the story. Well, no. Strangely, the letters continued to emerge. Paul was put under constant watch at the jail, and the police determined that they were not coming from him. Paul himself even received some. He ultimately served his time and was released in 1994, although there is still serious doubt that he was involved. So who was? What do you think happened here? And would you enjoy a more in-depth video on this insane case? If so, let us know in the comments section below. What do you make of this? The terrifying Doris Bither case. This is a scary tale from Culver City, California, from the mid-1970s. It centers around Doris Bither, a woman who lived in the city at the time, who contacted a parapsychologist by the name of Barry Taff in 1974, when she started to experience strange happenings within her home. Barry met with Doris and discovered a dark history shrouded the woman. Abuse, both physical and substance-based, had followed her throughout her life, and she was living with 4 children in a home that was not fit to be lived in. Doris claimed that she was both physically and sexually assaulted by an unknown entity in her home, and she desperately wanted Barry to investigate. Barry Taff visited Doris's home on August 22, 1974, and continued to do so over a period of 10 weeks. Barry opted not to look into the allegations of assault from the entity, but into the presence of the entity itself. He reported that he did find evidence of paranormal activity in the house. Cold zones, terrible smells, the appearance of eerie, dancing lights, and even objects moving on their own were recorded. The only evidence of these records that stand today are photos of these lights. Since the investigation, experts have determined Barry's photos to show mistakes in photo processing, such as problems with focus or exposure. Barry, however, insists that the paranormal activity was to blame for the strange goings-on in Doris's house. Benjamin Radford, however, a skeptical author on the topic of paranormal activity, wrote that Barry's conclusion was an example of confirmation bias based on his beliefs, and the fact that Doris was likely very distressed due to her living situation and history of abuse. It's a sad tale, but one that many believe is rooted in more human terrors than those of the paranormal. Regardless, Doris and Barry remain convinced that the house was haunted, and that Doris's problems were rooted in dark entities that followed her. The disturbing story of Margaret How Love It. Margaret How Love It, now in her early 80s, is a former volunteer naturalist. She hails from the US Virgin Island of St. Thomas and began volunteering at a local dolphin research center when she was in her early 20s. Day in, day out, she would turn up to the center and get to know both the dolphins and the scientists researching them. One of these scientists was John C. Lilly, a neuroscientist from California, who, backed by NASA, had big plans to build a research lab with a very irregular goal. He wanted to develop a method of communicating with extraterrestrial life forms, should we encounter them in the galaxy. His goal was to trial his research on some of Earth's most intelligent animals, dolphins. With the help of NASA, he was able to set up a dolphinarium on the island of St. Thomas. and housed 3 bottlenose dolphins, a male named Peter and 2 females named Pamela and Sissy. These were dolphins that were used to spending time around people, having previously been housed for entertainment purposes at marine studios in Florida. They had even starred in the TV show Flipper. By the time the dolphinarium was set up and ready to commence research, Margaret How Love It had become experienced in volunteering with dolphins. She was assigned as the dolphins' main trainer, and she worked closely with John C. Lilly on the mission to help dolphins understand human language, a practice that John one day wanted to test on species from beyond this world. Now, this was the 1960s, and scientific research methods left a lot to be desired when compared to those that take place today. John insisted that in order to carry out the research to its full extent, it would be a good idea for Margaret to live with Peter the male dolphin in the dolphinarium. The duo from this point onwards spent all of their time together, where Margaret would make sounds that incorporated the vocalizations of both humans and dolphins, in order to encourage Peter to mimic her. According to Margaret, she almost got Peter to say the words "Hello, Margaret," but he struggled with the letter M. Things then took a turn for the worst. It's important to remember that Peter was a young dolphin and was therefore discovering both his body as well as certain urges that come with adolescence. Being an intelligent animal that has spent a lot of time around humans, his only option to release these urges was by treating Margaret as though she was a female dolphin. Margaret quickly noted how Peter's actions were delaying his learning process, and in a bizarre move, she eventually opted to relieve Peter of his urges manually. On this topic, Margaret would eventually say, "It wasn't sexual on my part, sensuous perhaps. It seems to me that it made the bond closer, not because of the sexual activity, but because of the lack of having to keep breaking. And that's really all it was. I was there to get to know Peter. That was part of Peter. It would just become part of what was going on, like an itch. Just get rid of that scratch and we would be done and move on." Things still proceeded to get darker. Later, John C. Lilly had been provided with the funds to research the effects of the drug LSD, research in which he cruelly used the dolphins as test subjects. When both his language and drug experiments proved unsuccessful, he lost the funding and the dolphins were moved to a different facility. Unfortunately, the conditions in the new dolphinarium were not up to standard. Peter in particular struggled with the lack of space and light in his new home, and tragically opted to take his own life. He simply sank to the bottom and refused to breathe, drowning as a result, something dolphins can voluntarily do. This is a truly horrific story, and one that should serve as a reminder for ethics in research going forward. However, that probably will not be the case, and we have no idea the amount of studies that are currently going on behind closed doors. A ghost hunter's worst nightmare. This footage comes from Andrew Pollard, known as the Yorkshire Ghost Guy, when he went to investigate Ely Reservoir in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, UK. The reservoir was reported to be haunted by the ghost of an escaped asylum patient from the 1900s, who reportedly fell from a bridge and drowned in the reservoir. Andrew took to the reservoir alone, and at night, something most people wouldn't dare to do in the safest of places. Andrew attempted to call out the ghost whilst at the reservoir, but became frightened quickly by a strange sense he caught wind of, and ultimately fled. When Andrew arrived at his car, however, it would not start. Using a jump starter kit in his boot, he managed to eventually get it running, but became very scared in the process. "I promise I'm not doing this for effect, but I tell you there is something different about tonight. My car isn't starting," he says in the video. "I'm all on my own, it's pitch black, I really want to go home." Take a watch.
If the story is true, please come forward and tell people your story. Are you still here? Am I okay to be here? Am I okay to talk to you? Hello, could you come forward? My name's Andrew. What's your name? Am I in the right place? I simply wish to share your story. Did you jump from this bridge in the 1900s? Keep talking, I'm listening. I'm catching that, I think.
Andrew adds that his car had never broken down before, and the majority of his fear came from the fact that he was alone at night. He does not believe that the ghost of the escaped patient had anything to do with the incident, but acknowledges that it was terrifying and quite amusing in hindsight. What do you make of the footage, and do you think the paranormal energy surrounding the site had anything to do with the car not starting? We have heard, and even experienced ourselves, batteries and machines drain or malfunction whilst in the presence of a supposedly haunted place. Ghost caught on camera. In 2019, a ghost hunter from Cornwall, UK, made the bold claim that he had recorded the most definitive proof yet of life after death. Mark Davis was visiting Falmouth Cemetery on Cornwall's south coast. The historic cemetery is the final resting place of almost 180 service personnel who died during the World Wars, including several who are unidentified. Using specialist equipment, Mark claims he recorded multiple instances of paranormal activity, including 2 figures appearing from the grave of 2 women. He has edited the footage to show the exact moment he believes a spirit reveals itself. Take a look.
Greet us with the wind like you do.
There is definitely some movement in the clip, but whether that is faces you can see, as Mark claims, that may be a push. However, he is convinced. What do you think? Is this proof of life after death, or is there some other explanation? The most haunted road in Missouri, the Zombie Road. In a midwestern suburb of Missouri is a 2-mile stretch of track that has the reputation as being one of the world's most haunted trails, known as Merrimack Greenway. The route meanders through the woods of St. Louis County, and the series of trails cross the site of one of the largest Native American burial mounds in the country. It was originally built in the late 1860s to provide access to the Merrimack and the railroad tracks located along the river. In the 1950s, reports of numerous encounters with eerie paranormal activity surfaced that included the spirits of indigenous people, Confederate soldiers, the tortured souls of men killed in industrial accidents, and most frightening of all, packs of child ghosts. Take a look at this photograph that is said to show the children hiding in the woods. One of the most chilling stories is about the ghost of a man hit by a train who is said to haunt the road. But after doing some research, it seems that the man may in fact be a woman, as in 1876, Della Hamilton McCullough was hit and killed by a passing train car on the tracks in Glencoe. She is the only person to have died there, so maybe her ghost is being mistaken for a male. It is definitely a female who screams at people from the doorway of the old houses along the trail, so maybe that is Della as well. Nowadays the trail is known as Zombie Road, after a man named Zombie, who allegedly escaped from a local mental hospital and disappeared into the woods, left behind nothing but blood-soaked clothes. Where he went is a mystery, but it's said he is one of the many spirits that haunt the area. At night, the path is closed to the public, possibly to protect them from the terrors that reside along it, and by day it is only passable by foot or bicycles. But don't be fooled by the picture-perfect tree-lined track. It is not all it seems, and is known as a notoriously unsettling and strange place. This is an account from a lady who had a particularly unsettling experience along Zombie Road.
We hear kind of this high-pitched squeal almost, sounding like it was from either a young girl or maybe a teenage girl, young woman, and simultaneously as we hear that sound, I feel this sharp pain on my leg.
Alex and her aunt hurry from the woods. When she gets home, a sinister surprise.
There was scratches on my leg.
Alex says she was wearing layers and riding chaps, all untorn. She assumes whatever scratched her wasn't of this world.
We'd love to know if any of you have travelled along it, and whether you encountered anything strange. If we are ever in the area, we'll be sure to check it out. What happened to Ohio kangaroos? This next one is not so much creepy, but more of a mystery. On Thursday the 11th of August, 2022, the Brewster Police Department in Ohio got a call to say a strange animal was running loose around the town. At first the police thought nothing of it, and did a quick search but found nothing. A couple of days later, 2 more witnesses came forward, saying they had spotted a kangaroo. One of the witnesses recorded this footage.
Get your brakes on. Holy f***.
If this was in Australia, then no one would think anything of it. But in Ohio, America, there are no wild kangaroos. The animal was later identified as a wallaby, and some believe there was more than one. Police tried in vain to recapture the creature, but 7 days later, it was still on the run. Police had no idea where the wallaby came from, but thought it was likely an escaped pet. However, no one came forward to claim it. The wallaby continued to evade capture, and despite reports a private company was being sent in to catch it, there have never been any updates about the wallaby. So could it still be wandering around northern Ohio? We'd love to know what happened to it, and if anyone has any updates, we'd be interested to hear in the comments section below. Being from the UK, this reminds us of the big cat sightings that get reported throughout the United Kingdom. We even have our own personal encounter with a potential big cat that maybe we'll share soon. The terrifying story of the 1976 Chowchilla Kidnapping. This next story seems so unbelievable that it could not possibly be true, but it is. On Thursday, July 15th, 1976, at around 4 p.m, Frank Ray was driving a school bus containing 26 students from Dairyland Elementary School. They had been on a school visit to Chowchilla Fairgrounds swimming pool. Ahead of him, Frank could see a van blocking the road. It didn't seem like it was going to move, so Frank got out of the bus to check what the problem was, and was confronted by 3 armed men with nylon stockings over their faces. One of the men held a gun to Frank's head, and then proceeded to hijack the bus and its passengers. They drove the bus to Brenda Slough, a shallow branch of the Chowchilla River, where a second van was waiting. Frank and the children were bundled into the 2 vans, whose windows had been blacked out and their interiors reinforced. The hostages were then driven around for 11 hours before being taken to a quarry in Livermore. There they were told to climb down a ladder into a buried truck. Inside was a small amount of food and water and some mattresses. The men closed the makeshift hatch, covered it in earth, then drove off and left Frank and the children in their underground prison. The kidnappers then called Chowchilla Police Department to demand a $5 million ransom. However, the phone lines were busy, so the gang decided to sleep and try again later. However, they woke to the news that the children had escaped. Whilst entombed underground, Frank became convinced the metal hatch was about to collapse, so the group piled up the mattresses in an attempt to escape. Eventually, one of the students managed to wriggle through the soil covering the hatch and alerted a night watchman. The children and Mr. Ray were freed after their 16-hour ordeal. The kidnappers were quickly apprehended. The ringleader was Frederick Woods, whose father owned the quarry where the hostages were held. The other 2 were brothers Richard and James Schoenfeld. All 3 came from very privileged backgrounds and only concocted the bizarre scheme when they heard Ronald Reagan put out a press statement claiming that the state of California had $1 billion surplus and felt they could easily afford the ransom fee for safe return of the children. All the children were physically unharmed, but for many years suffered PTSD and other mental anguish due to trauma. The assailants were jailed for life, although they have all been released after spending most of their lives incarcerated. After Woods was released, he is reported to have said, "I didn't need the money, I wanted the money." As for Frank, well, he was hailed as a hero and was eventually gifted the yellow school bus he was driving that day. Pretty crazy story, right? the haunted Mr. Chew house. Lastly, we'll be taking a look at an extremely haunted house. In the heart of Delaware State in America stands a dilapidated mansion, almost taken over by nature. It's known as the Mr. Chew house, and the building has been the subject of a chilling legend for decades. In the late 1800s, the mansion belonged to a wealthy merchant called Samuel Chew. He was known for his elusiveness and eccentricities, and it was rumoured he had dealings with the occult. However, Chew's obsession with dark arts led him down a treacherous path, and it was speculated during one of his rituals he had unleashed malevolent spirits that had taken over his mind and his home. His once lavish mansion became a prison for his tormented soul. The locals were fascinated by what was going on in the house, but no one dared to go near it. Many years later, a teenager named Jack heard about the legend, and despite warnings to stay away, was determined to visit the house and tried to dispel the myths. On a moonlit night, Jack gathered up some friends, and armed with flashlights and bravado, they made their way to the mansion. As the house loomed before them, its once grand facade was now a crumbling shell. As they ventured inside, they felt an uneasy presence, and Jack felt a chill come over him. Wading through cobwebs and dust, the friends explored the dilapidated rooms in eerie silence, jumping at the shadows their flashlights were casting. As they journeyed deeper into the building, Jack felt an inexplicable pull towards a hidden room on the upper floor. He opened the creaking door, and it revealed a room filled with books, strange artifacts, and a dark, foreboding atmosphere. As he sifted through the contents, he came across Samuel Chew's journal. The pages were filled with terrifying accounts of the occult and cryptic symbols. It appeared the rumours were true, and Mr. Chew had indeed sold his soul to the devil, and had summoned malevolent spirits that now haunted the old mansion. Jack's friends urged him to leave and put the journal down, but Jack ignored their pleas. He was enthralled with its contents and wanted to know more. As he read on, he realized that Samuel Chew had sought immortality through a dark ritual, sacrificing the souls of innocent victims to sustain his own life, and he was now imprisoned in his mansion for eternity, a crazed soul with no escape. Suddenly, Jack could feel a chill in the air, and a haunting melody started to play. Jack's friends who were standing in the doorway turned around and saw a male apparition emerging from the shadows. It was the ghost of Samuel Chew. His eyes glowed as they fixated on the visitors to his home. A terrified Jack spoke to the figure, telling him he knew about the innocent victims he had sacrificed in search of eternal life. He urged Chew to find peace and release himself from the cycle of darkness and atonement he was in. He spoke of forgiveness and redemption. Jack's friends joined in urging Mr. Chew to seek forgiveness, and it seemed to work. Mr. Chew was being shown compassion and empathy from a living being, and this seemed to confuse the malevolent energy that was trapped in his soul. He gave out a huge gut-wrenching cry before disappearing into the darkness. The friends stood dumbfounded, but the evil presence they once felt had lifted, and the air seemed clearer, as if the heavy burden that once hung over it had gone. Jack and his friends left the mansion, believing they had released Samuel Chew from his torture. Or had they? Until the next group of brave souls venture up to the Chew house, we'll never know.